Chapter 22:19. This. How is this possible? In the editorial department of Whole Foods Media, O'Callaghan stared at the two identical picture albums in his hands in shock. This was sent back from Chaos City by Garland's fastest flying steed. As the boss of Whole Foods Media, O'Callaghan was also one of the picture book lovers. Garland did not send him a gift to cater to his tastes. After all, he knew that what he liked was not such a proper picture book. O'Callaghan, who had a bookshelf full of colorful picture books at home, was not surprised by how beautifully The Story of the Little Mermaid was drawn, but that the two picture books were exactly the same. This was a colorful picture book. According to Garland, there were 1,000 copies of the same picture book in Chaos City, and they were sold in limited quantities at Mamie's, priced at 1,000 copper coins. What did this mean? Most people would think about how to buy a few more copies, and then resell them at another place to make a profit. From O'Callaghan's professional perspective, this picture book could be sold for 50,000 to 80,000 copper coins in Rodu's current color market. The picture style was exquisite, and the story was interesting. It should be loved by many rich ladies. If he bought it for 1,000 copper coins, he could easily make 100,000 copper coins before the news spread to Rodu. Garland had asked him to help sell it. Of course, that was not all. 1,000 copies of the same picture book meant that someone in Chaos City had solved the problem of color printing. This was undoubtedly disruptive news to the print media. Imagine, if Whole Foods Media added color illustrations to their magazines, what kind of impact would it have on the gourmet magazine market? If this cost could be reduced, and the price could be controlled, the increment of Whole Foods Media's magazines would be unimaginable. O'Callaghan's breathing became heavier at the thought of this. Because Garland had sent back a piece of bad news at the same time. Meg had rejected the exclusive collaboration with Whole Foods Media, and had signed with 10 gourmet magazines at the same time. This meant that Whole Foods Media's exclusive advantage had been lost, and the $1 million miracle in the previous issue could not be continued. But if they could get the wealth password of color printing, other than gourmet magazines, at this moment, he had already thought of countless industries that would usher in a drastic change, and there were countless opportunities hidden in them. Not to mention anything else, even if he took out a part of those exquisite picture books from his collection and deleted some of the scenes that were not suitable for dissemination, it would be enough to shake up the picture book industry and make a lot of money. The good news was that this batch of picture books came from Mr. Meg, and the picture books were drawn by his daughter. The bad news was that Mr. Meg was clearly not an honest person who would easily fool others. He sold 1,000 copies of the picture book that cost 1,000 copper coins each in one day and easily obtained 1 million copper coins. How Keto wasn't sure if he had the ability to make such a person share his wealth password. O'Callaghan walked to the door of his office, and said to his secretary, "Book me a ticket to Chaos City tomorrow. I want the fastest flying steed." "Okay, boss." Interesting. How did Mr. Meg do it? He had actually managed to break through a problem that had not been solved for so many years, and he had even managed to do it so exquisitely. Was it magic? It doesn't look like it either. Buffett Manor. Hill sat comfortably on the sofa with her legs crossed. She looked at the picture book in her hands and clicked her tongue in wonder. It was a rare break, and the picture book was given to her by her subordinates. It came from Amy's and was made by Anne. The story was very interesting, and the drawings were very exquisite. The comfortable colors and drawing style allowed her to enjoy half an hour of pleasure. However, what interested her the most was the picture book itself. It was a color picture book, and it was a mass-produced color picture book with figures. This thing had never appeared in the market before. The reason was very simple. Until now, no one had been able to print a picture book in color. It was not that no one had tried, but most of them were very rough, and the colors were limited, so the combination was very ugly. It was better to use black and white to leave some room for imagination. Someone once said that if anyone could solve the color printing problem, they would have the next wealth password in the paper industry. Now, this person had appeared. Hill stroked the picture book, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. As expected, Mr. Meg had never disappointed her. From the steam locomotive to the color printing now, it was easier to accept with some foreshadowing. The Buffett family did not dabble much in the paper industry, but everyone knew the importance of a widely distributed media. It was the same for the Buffett family. Now, she smelled the scent of a revolution in this industry. The new rich would appear very soon, and this time, she might have the opportunity to set up a plan in advance. I wonder if Mr. Meg is going to do it himself this time, or sell the technology like before. Hill pondered for a while before turning to the door, and saying, I want to see the information of the best media people on the Norland continent tomorrow morning. Yes, young mistress. The secretary's respectful voice came from outside. Quick. Send this back to Rodu and get old Fong to print 10,000 copies. In a guest room in the north of Chaos City, a middle-aged man handed a picture book wrapped in a few layers of cloth to a young man. The young man frowned, and said, Father, this isn't a good idea. What do you know? We built our business on this. What's wrong with that? Even if we don't print it, others will. When it's everywhere in the market, what are you going to print? The middle-aged man jumped up and smacked the young man's head with a look of exasperation. But if we print 10,000 copies directly, what if we can't sell them? This isn't some restricted product that can't be bought in the market. The young man covered his head with an aggrieved expression. The middle-aged man rolled his eyes, and said, What do you know? This is the red braised pork recipe drawn by the daughter of the owner of Mamie's. Do you know how many copies of Mr. Mac's eggplant with garlic sauce were sold in the last issue of the Whole Food Mart last time? 1 million copies. You idiot. Not to mention 10,000 copies, I reckon we have to print a few more times. But your mother. Hurry up and crawl. The middle-aged man kicked him. The young man went out dejectedly, and did not dare to say anything else. Meg still did not know that the story of the Little Mermaid had attracted so much attention, but he had already started to plan how to sell Miss Black Cat better. This time, he planned to release it in Rodu. If he were to set the price, it would be 2,000 copper coins per copy. The price was twice as high as the Little Mermaid's, but the number of pages in this album was more than twice as high. Moreover, Annie's painting style had been honed for a period of time, and the way she presented it in Miss Black Cat was far beyond the Little Mermaid's. Moreover, his target audience was those rich and nobles who had money, leisure, and some appreciation. They were the opera house's target audience. Chapter 22-20. When night fell, Meg and Effie said their goodbyes, and passed the keys to her. They considered it as entrusting Saipan Tavern to her. The family went back to Chaos City under the cover of the night. Young mistress, you will be the boss of the 2 best taverns in Rodu from now on. You're awesome. Mara said to Effie with admiration. Luckily, Master chose young mistress in the end. Otherwise, she wouldn't know how to be a boss. I will be even busier in the future. My leisurely life will be long gone. Effie sighed. He's comfortable now. His wife and children can warm him up. It won't be too late to wake up late. It's all right, young mistress. I will do my best to help. Mara said eagerly. All right. Then from tomorrow onwards, you will practice 100 portions of pig's ears salad a day. They will be sold at our Titan Tavern. Huh? Mara was stunned. Didn't Master say that we can't sell imperfect pig's ears? This is actually relative. To Saipan Tavern, perfect pig's ears are the most suitable dish for the customers. Effie shook her head with a smile. But to Titan Tavern, even an imperfect pig's ears salad is enough to crush the dishes we provide now. Then, it will be perfect. I see. But... Mara was deep in thought. Your master wants you to practice 1,000 portions before you can graduate. Do you know how many pigs have to sacrifice their lives for 1,000 pig's ears? If you don't sell them, are you going to eat 1,000 portions of pig's ears alone? Effie said with a roll of her eyes. I will. Mara said resolutely. She didn't want to eat 1,000 portions of pig's ears. Just thinking about it scared her. However, she still asked curiously, "Young mistress, how many pigs have to sacrifice their lives?" Idiot. Of course it's 1,000. Mamie's was open for business for a day, and closed for another day, making the customers extremely resentful. Fortunately, it was a day off according to the rules. Instead, it was the next morning, and there was already a long line outside the restaurant. Most people came for breakfast, and a small portion came for the Little Mermaid sketchbook. Meg woke up early, and wrote a small blackboard to hang on the door. Once he opened the door, he saw pairs of resentful eyes in the dark. So early. Meg was a little surprised. He hung the small blackboard on the door, took a step back and stood in the warm range of the heater. He smiled and said, "It's cold, right?" "Cold. Cold." Harrison, who was standing in the front row, said with chattering teeth. "It's okay. Just bear with it for a while and it'll be over. Compared to this, the restaurant is really warm." Meg smiled and then closed the door. All the guests? Not long after, the door of the restaurant opened again. Meg walked out with a huge vat and 2 stacks of disposable cups. He looked at Harrison and smiled. "Come on, I'll leave the task of distributing the ginger soup to everyone to you. Warm up before eating." "This is the first time Mr. Mack has warmed me up." Harrison looked surprised. The customers were also curious about what was in the steaming vat. Meg handed a big spoon to Harrison and patted him on the shoulder. "I'll leave it to you. I promise I'll complete the task." Harrison smiled. Mag closed the door and went back into the restaurant. Harrison called out to the 2 young men, and they scooped a small cup of steaming red ginger soup for everyone. Then, they distributed it to everyone. The steaming ginger soup was placed in a paper cup, and it was warm in the hands. Their hands, which had been frozen for a long time, regained feeling. "It smells so good. Is it sugar?" A little girl held the cup with both hands and sniffed it gently. She was very curious. "Maybe Mr. Mack added sweet sugar in it," the little girl's father said with a smile. He blew on the steam and took a sip. The ginger soup was slightly sweet and spicy, but it didn't feel very spicy in the mouth. Instead, it felt very warm. It swirled in the mouth and then slid down the throat into the stomach. The warm feeling extended from the throat all the way to the stomach. Then, as if a glowing ball of fire was stuffed into the stomach, the body suddenly felt very warm. Delicious. The man's eyes lit up, and he took 2 more sips. He finished the small cup of ginger soup very quickly. Small beads of sweat appeared on his nose and forehead. He felt his whole body warming up, and it was from the inside out and from the top to the bottom. The chill of early spring was completely dispelled, and he felt very comfortable. Gulp gulp, the sound of drinking soup sounded one after another. Everyone had the same experience. After drinking a cup of ginger soup, their whole body warmed up, and the cold wasn't too hard to bear. "It's so hot. I feel like this cup of soup is about the same as sitting in the restaurant." As expected of Mr. Mack. He can make the ginger soup so delicious. I suddenly feel a little touched. Mr. Mack is indeed a good boss. Everyone was talking at once, and they were all amazed by the miracle of the ginger soup. The little girl finished the ginger soup in small sips, and looked up at the man. "It's so delicious. Can I have another cup?" "This." The man looked at Harrison, who was in front of him, hesitantly. Harrison, who had poured the ginger soup for hundreds of people, was so tired that his hands were no longer his own. He scooped the last bit of ginger soup from the bottom of the pot into a cup and was about to taste it when he heard the little girl's words. He looked at the cup in his hand, and then at the little girl. He smiled and handed the cup in his hand that he hadn't drunk yet. "Here, little girl. This cup is for you too." The little girl didn't reach out to take it. Instead, she looked at Harrison and asked, "Uncle, do you not have any left for yourself?" "It's okay. Uncle is full from smelling it just now." "It's still warm now," Harrison said with a smile. The little girl looked up at her father, and seemed to be asking for his opinion. "Drink it yourself. She's been working so hard for so long. She's had 1 cup." "It's enough," the man quickly said as he patted the little girl's head with a smile. "It's right for little kids to drink more. You won't get sick when you're warm." Harrison smiled and stuffed the cup into the little girl's hand, and then returned to his seat. "Thank you, Uncle." The little girl smiled sweetly. "You're welcome." Harrison waved his hand. The cold morning of early spring was warmed by a small cup of ginger soup. The hearts of the foodies were stirred by the little blackboard hanging on the door. Today's new dish, noodles, steamed wontons in chili oil, spicy. New dish, spicy chicken. After introducing shaved noodles and soup dumplings the day before yesterday, Mr. Mack introduced 2 new dishes today. Wow! Mr. Mack is so productive. Harrison couldn't help but exclaim. This is the victory of the hardcore breakfast party. From today onwards, we can finally eat hardcore food in the morning. Some people were overjoyed when they saw the steamed wontons in chili oil. Chapter 22-21. The best way to appease customers' grievances was to let them eat to their heart's content and let them enjoy the experience of lining up for a meal that was worth their money. This was something that Mag was very clear about, and he was also working hard to achieve it. The appearance of the red oil wontons had indeed added new options to the breakfast menu. Meg's breakfast preferences were related to his mood. Sometimes, he wanted to eat something light, and other times, he wanted to eat something heavy. It would be best if there was a choice. Yabamiya came early in the morning. She looked at Meg with admiration as soon as she entered the restaurant. 2 new dishes today. Boss, you're amazing. As a woman who had no talent in cooking, Yabamiya admired Meg's ability to continuously create delicious new dishes. It was as if his mind was filled with many delicacies, and he could easily create one dish after another that would make people gasp in amazement. "I have to give the customers something new, right?" Meg said as he pinched the wontons. "This doesn't look too difficult. Do you need my help?" Yabamiya looked at him for a while and asked eagerly. Mag glanced at her and nodded. "You can give it a try if you want to." "Okay." Yabamiya washed her hands and dried them. Then, she copied Meg and pinched a small piece of dough and pressed it with a rolling pin. A large piece of wafer lay quietly on the chopping board. Yabamiya pinched the wafer for a while before she finally removed the wafer from the chopping board. She looked a little embarrassed. She didn't expect that the seemingly simple process of crushing the wafer would be so difficult for her. "Just use the wontons that I pressed," Meg said with a smile as he gestured at the thin stack of wontons next to him. The wontons were thin, and one could feel their tenacity when they held them in their hands. However, they were thin and transparent when they were exposed to light. Yabamiya copied Meg and scooped a spoonful of meat into the middle of the wafer. After thinking for a while, she folded the wafer in half and pinched it tightly. Then, she pinched the wafer with her fingers. Yabamiya looked at the wontons in her hands and nodded with satisfaction. It didn't seem as difficult as she thought. Meg looked at the wontons in her hands and said calmly, "The wontons you made will fall apart before they even enter the water." "Really?" Yabamiya was stunned. She looked at the wontons she made and then looked at Meg's wontons. She didn't feel much difference. "For this bag of yours, first pinch the corners together, and then slowly pinch them together along the sides. One by one, it will look more beautiful, and at the same time, it won't be exposed during the cooking process, which will affect the taste and appearance." Mag demonstrated and taught at the same time. "I got it." Yabamiya nodded as if she understood. She followed suit and made a wonton, but she squeezed out half of the meat filling. "You're a failure." Meg laughed, but still encouraged her. You'll get it after a few more tries. Not long after, Phyllis came and joined the team of wontons. Phyllis was much more talented than Yabamiya. After a short while, she made the wontons quite well. Yabamiya sighed. Meg wrapped up the wontons and put away Yabamiya's and Phyllis's wontons. They had these wontons for breakfast this morning. Phyllis and Yabamiya, who had made the wontons themselves, asked for the wontons in chili oil. Shirley and the rest chose a light breakfast. Shaved noodles and soup dumplings became everyone's new favorites. Mag cooked 4 bowls of wontons in chili oil. When Amy saw the wontons wrapped up in chili oil when she woke up, she asked for a bowl. He also wanted to eat something spicy to wake up this morning. The braised hams floated in the red soup, dotted with sesame seeds and sprinkled with fresh spring onions. Steam rose from the braised hams, bringing with it the aroma of the chicken soup and the spiciness of the chili oil. It made people feel refreshed just by smelling it. Gulp, it smells so good. Anna swallowed her saliva. She felt that her noodles didn't seem so tempting anymore. Everyone couldn't help but take a few more glances. Although the food they had in the morning was a little too spicy, they still couldn't help but want to try it. I made this. It does look a little loose. Yabamiya looked at the bowl of wontons in chili oil in front of her. She picked up a wonton with a crooked mouth. The corner was slightly open, but fortunately, the meat filling didn't escape. She blew on the wontons and took a bite. The wontons were tender and tasty. The skin was thin and smooth, and the juicy meat was rich. The combination of the spiciness and juicy meat made her taste buds go crazy. She only needed to chew a little before swallowing it down. Only then did the spiciness blossom in her mouth. It flowed down her throat and warmed her stomach. This feeling was simply too wonderful. After swallowing the wontons, Yabamiya exclaimed, "It's so delicious." Yes, it's too delicious. Although it's a little spicy, it's really tender and smooth. Phyllis's eyes were glistening with tears as she nodded. As an elf who didn't eat spicy food and only ate clear soup and hot pot, this spiciness was still a little too much for her. However, this didn't affect her love for this wonton. Unlike the soup dumplings, which had the feeling of drinking soup before eating meat, this wonton with the chili oil soup made the wontons even wilder. In addition to the crispy and spicy chili oil, the soup base was chicken soup. The fresh and sweet chicken soup made the wontons taste even better. This soup has to be drunk like this. Amy held a spoon and gently peeled off the chili oil on the surface of the soup. Then, she scooped up a spoonful of soup and put it into her mouth. Everyone felt their throats tighten as they secretly guessed how spicy the wontons would feel. However, Amy looked like she was enjoying it. She drank a few mouthfuls of soup before starting to eat the wontons. After a while, small beads of sweat appeared on her small nose. She looked like she was eating very happily. Meg also started to eat. The taste was pretty good, but the wontons were a little lacking. After all, they were made by Phyllis and Yabamiya, so they weren't as finished. However, they were eating it for themselves, so it wasn't a problem to eat it casually. It wasn't good to waste ingredients. The wontons for the customers were all made by himself. The taste was absolutely delicious. As for the spicy chicken, this was a dish that would only be released at noon. Whether it went well with rice or wine, it was a good dish. Meg hadn't made it for everyone yet, so he was looking forward to it. The morning business hours hadn't even started yet, and the 2 elven girls were dragging out the Little Mermaid sketchbook that they were going to sell today. As Amy's side business, selling sketchbooks was indeed a good business. After all, it wasn't easy to find a business that could easily make millions in a day elsewhere. Chapter 22. At the back of the line, the secretary looked at Hill, who was wearing a red down jacket, and said, "Miss, there are quite a lot of people in the queue. Why don't I line up here and buy it for you? If you buy it here, you might not be able to have your breakfast until the end of business." That's just right. Hill smiled. The secretary wanted to say something, but stopped herself. She tactfully kept her question to herself. So Mamie's breakfast is also so lively. Mr. Meg indeed has an irresistible charm. Hill looked at the long line in front of her, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. For some reason, she had become more and more curious about Meg these days. Whether it was his superb culinary skills, his amazing inventions, or his unique ability to dabble in different industries. He could cook in the kitchen, work in the hall, tailor clothes, and build trains and cannons. Such a man was willing to spend a lot of time in the kitchen every day just to serve delicious food to his customers. Hill had never seen such a person before. Even in the history of the Norland continent, there had never been such a strange man. The more she interacted with him, the more she felt that he was unfathomable, as if he was hiding a huge secret. But the more it was so, the more curious she was, and she wanted to explore it. There had never been a man who made her feel this way. For Hill, who had devoted the past 18 years of her life to business, this was a little strange. Of course, she didn't think she would be easily moved by a man. But if this person was Meg, she was still willing to try to observe her inner feelings. After all, whether it was the steam engine or the color printer that could be made by him, they were all creations that could change the world. It was not surprising that such an outstanding man who could cook well could move any woman's heart. The restaurant was open for business, and the two young elves at the door were already selling picture books of The Little Mermaid. The exquisite picture books were loved by everyone, and there were many people who came specially to buy picture books. However, according to the rules, the picture books were given priority to the customers in the line, and there was a limit of 2 copies. To a certain extent, this discouraged the scalpers who were trying to get rich. Hill walked to the entrance of the restaurant and looked at the portrait of Anne on the signboard. After thinking for a while, he took out some money and bought a picture book. She already had one at home. She had bought this book to show her support. The thought was worth more than the price. The new product on the blackboard caught her attention. It was wonton in chili oil, and it sounded a little festive. However, many of the dishes at Mamie's were new to her. She had a lot of daily chores, so she didn't have much time to line up for a meal. It would be great if I could become the lady boss of Mamie's. Not only would I not have to line up every day, but I would also be able to eat tofu pudding, which is good for my skin. I would be able to lie down and collect money every day. Mr. Mack is also so handsome, a girl behind said faintly as she gently massaged her slightly numb legs. The Hill tilted her head and thought for a while with her smart brain. It sounds like a good investment. This girl probably didn't know that Mr. Mack didn't just own a restaurant. He also owned half of the rights to the steam engine and 10% of the rights to all the railways on the Norland continent that were to be developed in the future. That would be a terrifying amount of wealth. Apart from that, he could also lead the print industry to a new era of color printing, and revolutionize an industry that was full of imagination. In this aspect, the ladies in Chaos City did have a good eye. After all, the ideal husband in the hearts of so many girls was not only a chef and restaurant owner, but also an invisible business tycoon. The Hill and the secretary sat down at an empty table in the corner. It was already 8:40 a.m., and it was close to the restaurant's closing time. It was also the working hours for most of the workers, so there were many empty tables in the restaurant. "Hello, what would you like to eat?" Yabamiya came to the table. Although she had been busy the whole morning, she still had a smile on her face. "I'd like a wonton in chili oil," the Hill said to Yabamiya with a smile. "That's spicy," Mia reminded her. After all, they had eaten together before, so they weren't so distant. "It's okay. It's a little cold outside, so it's just right to eat something spicy. It shouldn't be as spicy as hot pot, right?" "Not really. After all, hot pot is not suitable to eat in the morning." Yabamiya shook her head with a smile. She took down the soup dumplings that the secretary ordered, and turned to walk to the kitchen, her blonde ponytail swaying behind her. The Hill looked around the restaurant. Amy must have gone to school, because she was nowhere to be seen. Only that fat, round orange cat was lying on the counter, one of its hands hanging outside, and squinting lazily. Barbara was sitting on a high stool behind the counter. Her fingers were pointing at the restaurant from time to time, and a breakfast would fly out of the restaurant and land in front of the customer. The Hill had a deep impression of this princess from the Moon Nation. With her status, she had already connected the teleportation portal from the Moon Nation to the Norland continent, and was deeply involved in the construction of the spell formation to seal the devil twice. After making a great contribution, she still stayed at Mamie's as a waitress. This really surprised her. There was also Gina, that mermaid who was as gentle as water, the princess of the Lantis tribe who could stop crying children in a second. She also continued to stay at Mamie's. The Hill looked at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. That upright figure and that handsome side profile were always hard to ignore. What are they after? Could it be that it's really just his dishes? The Hill frowned slightly as she pondered. As a businesswoman, she would always calculate her gains and losses carefully. Hence, after thinking seriously for a long time, she came to the conclusion that they were after his body. "Hello, here's your wonton in chili oil." A voice rang out beside her ear, and a wonton in chili oil landed steadily in front of her. The red soup didn't even tremble at all. The Hill collected her thoughts, and glanced at Barbara, who was smiling at her from behind the counter. She returned a smile before looking at the wonton in front of her. Red soup, white wonton, fresh green onions sprinkled on the surface, and bits of cooked sesame sprinkled on the soup noodles. The aroma of the chicken soup couldn't wait to enter her nose. After waking up early in the morning and waiting in line for 2 hours, Hill's stomach grumbled as he smelled the aroma of the food. Although the bright red chili oil made her throat tighten, it didn't feel too oily. She picked up a spoon, and used her chopsticks to pick up a wonton. She could see the wonton that was pinched together like a lace. It was exquisite and cute. Chapter 22-23. The thin and moist skin was gently bitten open and the juicy meat filling spread out in her mouth. The slightly spicy soup blossomed in her mouth and intertwined with the fragrance of the meat. Gil felt as if she had fallen onto a soft quilt, then was instantly shaken into a firm and warm embrace. A warm feeling slid down her throat all the way to her stomach, then spread to her limbs and bones. She tried her best to suppress the delicious taste that made her tremble all over, and then carefully savored it. After eating one wonton, there was a trace of sweat on the tip of Hill's nose. "It's so delicious." Hill looked at the wonton in front of her and her eyes lit up. Because she was busy with work, she was not very particular about eating. It was common for her to be too busy to eat. Breakfast was even more dependent on her mood. However, this breakfast, which seemed a little heavy at first glance, captured her heart in an instant. That kind of wonderful feeling made her feel as if her mood today had become brighter. She could even understand why people queued up for so long. Although the long queuing time consumed a lot of physical and mental strength, when you tasted a delicious and warm breakfast, that kind of tiredness would be doubled by a sense of satisfaction. Moreover, it would give you a stronger motivation and mental strength. This was probably the magical power of delicious food. How could a small wonton be enough? She ate one after another. From time to time, she would use a spoon to stir the red soup on the surface and drink a spoonful of chicken soup. Not long after, a bowl of red oil wonton was down her stomach. If it wasn't for the red soup being so spicy and oily, she might not even have left the soup base. Phew. Hill gently exhaled and revealed a satisfied smile. Delicious and comfortable. She hadn't eaten this kind of breakfast in a long time. She took out a silk handkerchief and gently wiped the sweat from her forehead and nose. Her gaze fell on Meg, who was tidying up the kitchen utensils in the kitchen. If she wanted to eat this kind of breakfast every day, she had to wake up at 6 o'clock. After a simple wash, she had to take a carriage and spend 20 minutes to arrive at Mamie's. Then she had to queue for 2 hours to enter the restaurant and order a wonton in red oil. After eating, she had to take a carriage and spend 20 minutes to go to the bank. This meant that she would have to spend almost 3 hours just for breakfast. Furthermore, she wouldn't be able to eat the tofu pudding at this time. Although she was very confident in her appearance, she was at the age when her skin and body were in the best condition. However, if she could have a bowl of tofu pudding every morning, it would make all of her skin problems disappear. That was something that no woman would refuse. And this was only for breakfast. If they wanted to eat lunch and dinner, the queue and meal time might increase. Mr. Mack was a man of principle. He would never let anyone in. Money could solve many problems, but it couldn't solve Mr. Mack's problem because he was also very rich. Currently, other than the employees of Mamie's, even the city lord, Michael, had to line up obediently for a meal. It was impossible for her to be a waitress. After all, she still had her own ambitions and dreams. Therefore, if she wanted to go downstairs and have a delicious breakfast every morning without having to line up or wait, it seemed like she could only become the lady boss of Mamie's. Now that I think about it, it seems like it's really worth it. No wonder so many ladies want to be the lady boss. Hill's eyes were burning as she stared at Meg. Her smart brain started to calculate the benefits of this matter. Meg, who had taken off his apron and hung it at the side, felt a burning gaze on him. He looked up and happened to meet Hill's eyes. "Oh, Mr. Hill. Oh, this big banker actually came for breakfast." Meg was a little surprised. Hill's expression was a little awkward. A blush flashed across her face, but she quickly changed it into a qualified banker's smile. Meg picked up the thermos on the counter at the side, took a sip of goji berry water, and closed the lid. He looked at Hill, and said, "Miss Hill, what brings you here for breakfast today?" "Because this place has the best breakfast in Chaos City." "Do I have a choice?" Hill replied with a smile. "That sounds reasonable." Meg smiled. He didn't think Hill would spend a few hours just to have breakfast. "Other than breakfast, I actually have something to discuss with Mr. Meg." Hill didn't beat around the bush. The restaurant's morning operating hours were about to end, and most of the customers had already left. "Then let's have a cup of tea together later." Meg nodded. After all, Hill was an excellent business partner. She controlled the biggest tycoon on the Norland continent. She was a real rich lady. It would be good to make her happier. "All right." Hill nodded, and signaled her secretary to settle the bill and leave. The restaurant closed at 9 a.m. sharp. After Mia and the others were done with the cleaning, they quickly left. Meg brewed a pot of chrysanthemum tea, and sat down with Hill at the table in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Hill took off her down jacket, and wore a long black knitted dress. The fitting cut and design outlined her figure perfectly. Beside her was the book, The Story of the Little Mermaid, that she bought in the morning. "Thank you." Hill received the tea that Meg poured for her. She took a whiff of the fragrant chrysanthemum tea, and put down the teacup with a smile. "I heard that the railway to Vic Mountain has been very busy recently. Has it already entered into normal operation?" Meg asked casually as he poured himself a cup of tea. "Yes. We had to transport ores and other urgent items from Vic Mountain to Chaos City previously, and that made this section of the railway run at full capacity. Many problems were exposed, but many problems were also solved. Now, the operation has become normal, and the capacity is very good." Hill nodded. "We are preparing for the railway from Chaos City to the Dwarves. Once it's open, the trade between the three regions will experience a qualitative leap. This route is indeed not bad." Meg nodded. Vic Mountain produced all kinds of ores, and the goblins were not good at forging. Relying on the railway's large-scale transport capacity, the ores from Vic Mountain would be transported to the Dwarves for processing and forging, and then the processed products would be sent to Chaos City to be sold. This formed a closed loop. The most important thing was that these two races were not very powerful, and did not have a strong desire to fight for supremacy. Thus, they were easier targets for integration. Once the economy was deeply tied, and communication became more convenient, the integration of the goblins and dwarves into Chaos City was something to look forward to. This was also one of Meg's ideas back then. However, he didn't expect Hill and the City Lord's castle to make use of the Northern Expedition this time to facilitate this so quickly. When the railway started to spread across the Norland continent, the convenience and economy of the running steam locomotives would definitely attract the other races to join in. The communication across the entire continent would increase rapidly with the convenience of transportation. However, I'm not here to talk about the railway today. I want to talk about this picture book. Hill picked up the picture book of The Little Mermaid, and looked at Meg with a smile. Chapter 22-24. Meg looked at the picture book in the Hill's hands and smiled. Anne's work. It's very well drawn. I like it very much. Yes, it's one of the best young girl picture books I've ever seen. Whether it's the style or the story, Anne's talent in drawing is amazing. The Hill nodded with a smile and changed the topic. However, I'm more curious about the reproduction method of this picture book. He went straight to the point. She still liked this way of talking. You're interested? Meg looked at the Hill. Yes, it's just like the steam engine. It's hard not to be interested. The Hill nodded with certainty. After all, it's a big deal that can change an industry, and it's always important to have the right to speak. Meg smiled and looked at the Hill with admiration. A small picture book could be resold by clever people to make a small profit. Those in the industry might be able to feel the opportunity, but the Hill saw the opportunity to fight for the right to speak. He was an old capitalist handed down from his ancestors. The appearance of color printing was a blow to the current paper media on the Norland continent. It was a very simple analogy. If anyone could produce a full-color magazine now, whether it was a geography magazine that introduced the customs of various places, a Playboy with a seductive succubus on the cover, or even a gourmet magazine, they could easily occupy a huge market. Moreover, the other magazine publishers couldn't fight back. Color was so magical. This was also the reason why people on Earth kept pursuing resolution. The profit of the magazine itself wasn't so important. As long as the sales reached a certain level, it could become a channel with wide influence. Whether it was an advertisement or a declaration of a certain idea, it was a very powerful voice channel. Now, most of the resources were distributed, but the appearance of color printing and the exclusivity for a period of time was very likely to change this situation. It was a pity that Meg only had a nuclear printer in his hands. Although the printing speed should be able to keep up with the ambitions of the Hill, it was very difficult for him to explain how such a high-level thing was made. He only provided a blueprint for the steam engine, and the Hill used his money to build a strong team of siege lions. Finally, they overcame many difficulties and created it. But nuclear power. Even if he had a brain from Earth, it was not enough. As for color printing, he had to sort out the knowledge in his mind and figure out how to make a printing machine that was not that exaggerated, but was still usable. The Hill looked at Meg and said seriously, I don't know if I'll be lucky enough to work with Mr. Meg again this time. I think with our familiar cooperation, we should be able to do this very well. Actually, so far, this is just an immature idea. The output is only enough to produce 1,000 picture books a day. Meg shook his head. The Hill said thoughtfully, Are you planning to do it yourself this time? So far, yes. Meg nodded and said indifferently, You also know that I don't have much ambition. In the beginning, I just wanted to let the children's works have color and let more people appreciate them. Freak. Shameless. Hatue. The system complained. The Hill was stunned. She opened her mouth slightly and looked at Meg in disbelief. She did not expect that the purpose of solving this problem that had troubled the world for so many years was just to let the children's works have color when they were spread. He's really a good man. The Hill could not help but think in her heart. She felt that Meg's image in her heart had improved. He could cook, he was wise, considerate, and cared about his family. He was indeed a good man, a good father. Right, other than being the boss's wife, being his daughter seemed like a good idea too. She had to call him father. The hill blushed and drove away the strange thoughts in her mind. She looked at Meg and said, "If that's the case, then I'll wait for Mr. Meg to make this technology more widely available before we work together. I hope you can think of me at that time. I'm willing to provide all of Mr. Meg's needs." Okay. Meg nodded. In terms of wealth, no one could compare to the hill. Moreover, as a businessman, working with the hill was more reassuring than working with a certain force or race. As long as the distribution of benefits was reasonable enough, the cooperation would be very stable. There was no need to worry about the details. The hill took a sip of tea. The faint fragrance of chrysanthemum lingered in her mouth, refreshing and warm. Putting down the teacup, the hill flipped her hair and pretended to be casual. "Mr. Meg has never mentioned anything about the boss's wife." As soon as the words left her mouth, the hill blushed. She glanced at Meg from the corner of her eyes and her heart began to beat wildly. How could she ask that? Meg was slightly stunned. He looked at the hill with a slightly strange expression. Speaking of which, the relationship between them did not seem to have reached the level of discussing personal matters. Moreover, why did she suddenly ask about the boss's wife? Why was she blushing? Could it be, she wants to get my printing press for free? The boss's wife is not too worried. I heard that the line has already stretched to the city gate. Meg smiled. He looked at the hill with a slightly wary gaze. "Miss Hill, do you have someone in mind?" It would be fine if she did. If not, then he would have to be careful. Wuji's mother was right. Beautiful women were all liars. The hill blushed a little under Meg's stare. But what did he mean by that question? Everyone knew that she, the hill Buffett, was as beautiful as a fairy. She was talented and beautiful. There was no man in Chaos City who was worthy of her, let alone a man who could catch her eye. Of course, that was in the past. Today, she suddenly felt that Meg was not bad either. Although he was a little older than her, he looked more mature. He maintained his figure very well. She could vaguely see his straight figure under his shirt. His slender fingers were very beautiful. Even though he had just finished working in the kitchen, he did not seem to be greasy at all. So, was he testing to see if there was a chance? Those who have me in mind can probably line up all the way to the city gate. It's a pity that I don't like anyone, the hill said calmly. Meg raised his eyebrows. He had met a kindred spirit. He was already at the city gate, but she was already outside. However, as the richest single woman in Chaos City, the hill, who was rich, beautiful, and had a figure, was definitely the target of many men. "Big sister, I don't want to work hard anymore." Meg felt that if he shouted that out now, he might be on the path to living off a woman. Of course, the biggest risk of this path was not in bed. It was that he might be killed by Irina halfway. Besides, Meg did not think that this intelligent business tycoon would really be charmed by a chef like him. This kind of story only happened in children's fairy tales. So, she wanted to get the printer for free. "I refuse." Meg blurted out. Chapter 22-25. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. The hill and Meg looked at each other. Although they remained calm and collected, the atmosphere gradually became awkward. "I'm sorry. I suddenly thought of a question, so I accidentally blurted it out. You know, smart people like us would usually think of a few things at the same time," Mag explained seriously. I know. The hill smiled and nodded. "I actually know how to do that too." Ha ha ha, I knew we are the same kind of people. Then I will go back first. Okay, I will send you back. Come back for dinner when you are free. Meg stood up. "It would be best if we don't have to queue." The hill said faintly, "Queuing is too extravagant for me. I will definitely call you the next time we have a meal together." Meg smiled and nodded. This was a few million people. Queuing for a few hours for a meal was indeed too extravagant. The Hill came out of the restaurant, wrapped her down jacket tightly and quickly boarded the carriage. Only then did she let out a long sigh and used her small hand to fan her slightly hot cheeks. Thinking of the conversation with Meg just now, she couldn't help but laugh. But, what is he rejecting? What was he thinking just now? The Hill held her chin and couldn't help but think curiously. Miss, are we going to the bank now? The secretary asked. Yes. The Hill responded and the carriage slowly drove away from Amy's. Meg sat by the window and watched the Hill's carriage go away. He took a sip of tea, but his thoughts had already drifted away. The little girl's vague teasing was no longer enough to make an uncle like him restless. Let's talk about something more practical. He had a beautiful wife at home, so he didn't dare to act rashly. He had already achieved the freedom of wealth. Regardless of whether it was the few $100 million that he stole from Dragon Island, the investment in the textile factory, the brewery, half a street on Romo Street, the Saipan Tavern, or the Manna Hot Pot restaurant with Rena, even if he ate king crabs every day, it would still be an inexhaustible wealth. However, since his previous life, money was just a number to him, an inexhaustible number. Therefore, he wasn't too obsessed with it. Instead, he had more expectations about how to make his heart rich and happy, and how to make his family and friends happy. The world had not changed for the better. They had fought for 100 years of peace, but this was still a world with huge racial differences. The hatred did not disappear. After a short honeymoon period, friction would follow. This was a problem that had not been solved on Earth in the 21st century. Naturally, it was impossible to solve it overnight on this barbaric continent. To his relief, there were at least some positive changes. For example, the dwarves, goblins, and Chaos City were quickly establishing ties and connections. Lantist was eliminated and joined the underground city. Connie had complete control over the orc race. At least, it was more promising than Oster's era. The feudal system of the elves was collapsing. Sally might become the new ruler of the elves. Meg had always thought that she was a kind girl. Ever since the giant dragons became transportation dragons, they seemed to have become much more humble. At least, they wouldn't look down on people with their nostrils. The forest trolls were still reclusive. It was indeed difficult for such a huge creature to integrate into another society. However, losing a hot-tempered and ambitious chief should be a good thing for the world. The situation with the demons was more complicated. No powerful race could unify the entire tribe. They were all scattered. Meg had no idea how to develop in the future. Lastly, there was the Roth Empire. Andre had already announced to the world that Sean would be the crown prince. This meant that this huge empire would be handed over to Sean in the future. This was terrible. Meg was not very happy. Therefore, he was thinking whether the throne should be handed over to Vanessa or that little carpenter. The queen was pretty good, too. It was just that Vanessa might not be willing. He was not familiar with the little carpenter, so he had to observe more. The Moon Nation was rather interesting. He would like to take a look if he had the time. Although humans had successfully landed on the moon, they had not settled down. Wouldn't it be great if he could stay there for 3 days and 2 nights? As for the underground city, he hadn't chatted with she for a few days. This ice beauty was too difficult to talk to. She would reply with one word, He was also looking forward to that world with a high civilization. However, out of fear of danger, he did not have any plans to enter the underground city recently. That world might have beings that were beyond the 10th tier, and technology that was more advanced than the system. He was even a little worried that his system would be discovered after entering that world and capture him for dissection. This system is very advanced, okay? It's just restricted according to the rules of the Norland continent. Host, please don't overthink it, the system said angrily. Advanced my foot. Amy's system can reward a nuclear power printer for finding a snail. You're rewarded with a spicy chicken for fighting a great old one? Just tell me, are you spicy chicken? Meg rolled his eyes. This system. This system. This system is the professional. Now that the dungeon and the Moon Nation have appeared, can you reconfigure your authority? We're playing with dimensionality reduction attacks. Now that we're being attacked by someone else, it's very uncomfortable, Meg negotiated. The setting system needs to be rebooted. Then you rebooted. The premise of rebooting is that the host dies, and the system returns to the cycle of reincarnation. Are you sure you want to activate the self-destruct program? Stop, stop, stop. Meg quickly stopped this nameless system from doing something stupid. After this system's evaluation, the underground world has no signs of invading the Norland continent. Furthermore, the existence of the Norland continent is not an unknown world to them, but a world that they have abandoned. Therefore, as long as the host does not jump out of line, you won't be too aggrieved. Then let's change our way of thinking. If the underground world can break through the 10th tier shackles, and if I enter the underground city, will I have a chance to become a god physically? Meg asked seriously. This was a question that he had been thinking about recently. The ancients abandoned the Norland continent not because the Norland continent's resources were exhausted, and they could not survive. It was more likely that they wanted to seek a higher upper limit. She's battle relied mostly on guns and battleships, but the aura emanating from her was close to 10th tier. Given her age, she might be a genius in the underground world, but it could also be that the environment of the underground city made it convenient for her to cultivate. Theoretically, it's possible, but the risk of the host entering the underground city is uncontrollable. I hope the host can act cautiously, the system said solemnly. Meg ended the conversation with the system, took out the transmitter, and sent a message to She. Braised pork is simmering on a small stove in early spring. It's gurgling and steaming. Just poke it with a chopstick and it'll go through. Do you want to try? After a while, Meg received a reply. Coming. Chapter 22-26. Sometimes, women were just so hard to figure out. You wanted to flirt with her, but she was driving an electromagnetic cannon, a super battleship that could blast a 10th tier powerhouse to pieces with one shot. The back seat of a bicycle was obviously not attractive. But if you said she was cold and aloof, a pot of red braised pork could lure her out. Meg got up and walked to the kitchen. He took out a piece of pork belly from the fridge and started to prepare a portion of red braised pork for the incoming guest. He cooked rice for 3 people in the rice cooker. The red braised pork did not go well with the rice, so it was lacking some soul. Moreover, that woman's appetite was not to be underestimated. The red braised pork wrapped in bright red was poured into the crock to simmer. Meg returned to the window, took a book, and nestled comfortably in the chair to read. Ugly Duckling stretched and jumped down from the counter. It walked slowly to Mag's side, jumped onto the chair, and sat comfortably on Mag's lap. Meg glanced at Ugly Duckling, which started to purr, and placed the book in his hand on its head. The height was just right, and one hand was placed on the soft cat cushion. It was quite warm. Meow, Ugly Duckling protested softly. Meg flipped a page and remained unmoved. Not long after, the doorbell rang. Meg got up and opened the door. She was standing outside the door in a silver-black bodysuit. Fortunately, she had put away that ridiculously huge sniper rifle. You're quite fast. Meg glanced at his watch. It had only been an hour. He wondered if it was the commute time from the underground city to Chaos City. She's nose twitched as she smelled the fragrance of meat. She then said calmly, I happen to be doing something nearby. Meg understood what she meant. I didn't come all the way here just for a portion of red braised pork. Come in. Meg smiled and made way. Everything was easy now that he had asked her out. Meg poured a glass of warm water for She, then went into the kitchen to cut the braised pork and put it on the yellow stove. There were a few pieces of burning charcoal in the stove and a black casserole on the stove. It had just been moved from the stove and the red braised pork inside was still boiling. The red braised pork was about 2 centimeters square. The thick meat aroma was wrapped in the steam and she, who had just taken a sip of water, could not help but swallow her saliva. This was too fragrant. When she received Meg's message, she had just come out of the defense building and needed to make a report to the army. After some serious consideration, she turned down the task of reporting, and switched to reporting online. Then, she continued to immerse herself in her job as an observer. She entered the transmigration passageway, came to the Norland continent, and rushed to Chaos City as quickly as possible. This fellow had obviously deceived her. At that time, the braised pork was not stewing on the stove. It should still be stewing in the pot. He thought that he would miss the best time to eat it, but now it seemed that this was the best time to eat it. Meg got a bowl of rice and sprinkled a small plate of chives into the pot. The red was dotted with bits of green, as if it had been injected with soul. There was also a small plate of pickled radish that Meg marinated himself. The red-skinned radish was cut into thin fan-shaped slices with its skin and marinated with millet chili, pepper, rock sugar, salt, and a little vinegar for a few days. It was the simplest recipe and the most refreshing pickled radish. "Thank you," she said and did not stand on ceremony. She picked up her chopsticks and put a piece of braised pork into her bowl. She came here for the braised pork, and the only thing that needed to be taken seriously was the braised pork. The fat and tender braised pork was extremely soft. Her chopsticks left a mark on it gently. The bright red color made her feel happy. It was a mixture of fat and lean, and the meat skin had a crystal texture. When she returned to the underground city these few days, she went to the few restaurants that she frequented in the past, but none of the food gave her such a wonderful experience as the braised pork. In the dead of the night, she flipped through the clips of braised pork in the Little Mermaid's book and felt even more hungry. However, she was a reserved person after all. She set up the image of a cold female officer and could not take the initiative to ask Meg for food. However, it was different if he took the initiative to ask. Therefore, she crossed the 2 worlds in less than an hour and came here. She was really craving it. She gently blew on it and put the whole piece of braised pork into her mouth. It was a little hot, but with this bite, the meat juice overflowed in her mouth. It was sweet and soft, fat but not greasy. The full meatiness, soft and sweet texture made her close her eyes involuntarily. Ah, this was a long-lost feeling. The feeling of finally getting what she wanted after thinking about it day and night was too satisfying. Her taste buds were cheering and jumping in joy. In contrast, the status of the restaurants in the underground city had dropped a lot in her heart. They were too bland and it was difficult to feel surprise and joy. Then, she picked up the rice and took a big bite. The soft rice had a fragrance that swept away the greasy feeling in her mouth. The more she chewed, the sweeter it became. After eating a few pieces of braised pork and half a bowl of rice, she's gaze fell on the small plate of pickled radish. She picked up a piece of radish and smelled a sour taste just as it was about to her mouth. It was not the kind of sour taste, but a slightly aggressive sweet and sour taste that made her salivate unconsciously after smelling it. She tried to take a small bite. The crisp texture and the sweet and sour taste bloomed on the tip of her tongue. It was a refreshing feeling that instantly broke through the remaining greasy taste in her mouth. Then, a slightly spicy feeling bloomed. It's quite delicious. She's eyes lit up and she put the remaining half of the pickled radish into her mouth. Listening to the crisp sound of chewing, her mood seemed to become brighter. The braised pork was simmered on a small flame, always maintaining the best temperature for eating. She scooped 2 spoonfuls of thick gravy onto the rice and stirred it evenly. Every grain of rice was coated with the gravy of the braised pork. Then, she scooped a spoonful and put it into her mouth. It was the best braised pork soup mixed with rice. The rice soaked in gravy was not only sweet but also salty and sweet. There was no need for other side dishes as it was a delicacy in itself. This was also one of she's favorite ways to eat. A pot of braised pork, a pot of rice, and a plate of pickled radish. She ate alone at a leisurely pace. About half an hour later, she finished all of them. This woman is not easy to feed. Meg was secretly speechless. In their family, only Amy could compete with her in terms of appetite. She put the last grain of rice into her mouth and licked the gravy at the corner of her mouth. She put down the chopsticks and bowl, picked up a tissue to wipe the corner of her mouth, and leaned back in the chair in satisfaction. It had been a long time since she had such a comfortable meal. Fortunately, she was busy in the morning and did not have time to eat breakfast. Chapter 22-27. Meg was not in a hurry to clean up the dishes. He stroked the cat with one hand and looked at she calmly. She rarely showed such a relaxed state, but this pot of red braised pork and a big pot of rice seemed to have made her lower her guard, which was more beneficial for their upcoming conversation. "What's the matter?" She looked up at Meg and asked. "Look, some women are so unromantic. You've just fed her and in the blink of an eye, she acts like she doesn't know you. Can't I treat you to a meal? After all, we've been through life and death together." Meg smiled. She nodded slightly. "You can call me if you have red braised pork next time." Meg was speechless. Women. Sure enough, she came here for my red braised pork, not me. What about the one in the Mecca last time? Speaking of which, he's a brother who fought together. I should invite him for a meal, Meg said casually. How are you sure that he's a man? She looked at Meg. So, it's a girl? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. What? Is a female army popular in the underground city? Or is the underground city a country of women? The one who drove the battleship to the Great Old One and self-destructed was also a girl. So be it if she's a girl. It's fine. I don't like to spend time on men. That's not important. She did not answer him directly. Meg nodded and said seriously, it's not important. Even if she's a girl, I plan to treat her to a meal. She's mouth was too hard to pry open, so Meg planned to change it to someone else. He did not believe that everyone in the underground city had the same temper as she. Aren't you worried that you'll be exposed if more people know about your restaurant? She glanced at Meg and asked. Compared to me opening a restaurant here, the existence of the underground city should be a more explosive secret. Meg looked calm and fearless. This secret has been kept very well for tens of thousands of years, she said calmly. The corners of Meg's mouth twitched slightly. This was a blatant threat. It was indeed from a high-level civilization. How's the situation in Lantis now? Meg asked without beating around the bush. Pretty good. The agreement between Lantis and the underground city has been signed, and they've officially joined the underground city. They've also been assigned a territory, and they'll enjoy all the rights of the underground city federation, she said. Meg nodded. The system did a lie detector test on she, so she probably did not lie. I would like to know if the dungeon can provide a limited amount of permission to visit relatives. You also know that I have a friend who's the Princess of Lantis. Being alone in Chaos City, it's inevitable that I miss my family and friends. No. She's answer was simple and clear, leaving no room for negotiation. That's too cruel. For example, when you enter and exit the underground city, you can give her a ride, and when you come out, you can bring her along. It won't be long. Meg tried to communicate. She knows about the existence of the underground city, and it's already a special case that she still retains her memory. Once she enters the underground city and understands it better, she'll become a huge threat to the underground city. Therefore, she won't be allowed to leave the underground city, she said calmly. Only entry and no exit. Meg had a rough understanding of the underground city's mechanism. This meant that it was not allowed to enter the underground city through proper channels and return to the Norland continent safely. Since she had said so, Meg did not continue to pester her. This was obviously not something that she could change with her authority. "Where's your big eagle, sniper rifle? Can I borrow it to play with?" Meg changed the topic. He was quite interested in Shishi's mechanical anti-material sniper rifle. Men were usually more interested in such things. No. She rejected him coldly. Red braised pork isn't that easy to make. It requires a wild boar that eats a healthy diet, goes to bed early, wakes up early, and exercises regularly. Then, choose streaky pork with a fat and lean belly. Just like the pot of red braised pork just now, a 500-pound wild boar can only make 3 to 4 servings. After choosing the streaky pork, it's just the beginning. We have to process this meat, blanch it, cut it. Smack. Before Mag could finish his sentence, an anti-material rifle was placed in front of him. It was not Shi's. It was slightly smaller, but the style was quite similar. The black metallic luster did not reflect light. Instead, it seemed to absorb light and looked very domineering. Judging from the wear on the stock and trigger, this was not a new gun. It was probably a gun that she often used. "This is the gun I used before. You can take a look," she said. After all, he had eaten several meals of red braised pork for free. This request could be fulfilled. Meg did not stand on ceremony and picked up the sniper rifle. It was more than 1.5 meters long and weighed about 100 pounds. The density of the metal was extremely high. Freakishly strong woman. Meg gave Shi a new label in his heart. Compared to his Tian-Du sword, it paled in comparison. However, she looked thin and weak, but she was able to hold such a heavy sniper rifle and snipe in seconds. Her strength was not to be underestimated. Mag fiddled with it for a while. Although this gun looked very high-tech, it was still a firearm, so it had some similarities. However, the principle of the original gunpowder explosion in the barrel seemed to have been improved. He could not find out the specifics, but she said that the effective killing range of this gun was 20 kilometers. That was about 10 times the range of the Bartley. Meg looked at the sniper rifle in his hand and felt that the weight did not seem to be a problem. Although it could not make a headshot from 800 miles away, a 20 kilometers shooting range was enough to complete most of the sniping missions. This distance was full of imagination. It was difficult to even take good precautions against a sniper at this distance. "Why don't you try shooting twice?" Meg said. "This shot can penetrate 10 buildings. Are you sure you want to shoot?" She looked at Meg and asked. "Of course, we have to change places. It should be very cool to hunt." Meg was reluctant to put it down. The system would not give him such advanced equipment and he did not have the skills to make it himself. This is combat equipment. No one will eat prey that has been shot to pieces. She shook her head. "Good guy." Meg was stunned. "What do you usually use to hunt?" Meg continued to be curious. She took out a small caliber shotgun. Compared to Meg's sniper rifle, this gun looked very delicate and was also equipped with a scope. Meg put down the sniper rifle in his hand and picked up the shotgun. The gun was more than 10 pounds, but it felt light in his hand and did not feel much. Sure enough, a real man should use an anti-material rifle. This kind of gadget was for children to play with. "Why don't you sell this gun to me?" Meg looked at Shi and said, pointing at the anti-material rifle. "Not selling," she said without hesitation. 1 lifetime free braised pork voucher. Meg offered a price. She frowned and seemed to be in deep thought. "Rice is also free," Meg added. She subconsciously bit her lip and began to struggle. "You can choose another dish. It's also free for life," Meg added. "Deal." She gritted her teeth and nodded. Chapter 22-28. Meg happily put away the sniper rifle and resisted the urge to get another shotgun for free. As a human, one should not always think of getting a free ride. He gave she a lifetime free red braised pork card and got such a powerful and high-tech sniper rifle. No matter how he looked at it, he made a huge profit. Of course, she gave him the sniper rifle so easily because she was sure that he would not wander around with it. After all, the sniper rifle that she had eliminated was no match for the sword in his hand. As for the imitation, did you think that the ancient people's tens of thousands of years of technological advancement was a joke? Norland continent was only half a step into the age of steam technology. If they wanted to imitate this sniper rifle, it would take at least a few hundred years to even analyze the materials. She also thought, this is worth it. Meg took the menu and put it in front of she. He said, there's one more dish. Choose. She's eyes looked around and landed on Buddha jumps over the wall. Meg's eyelids twitched and he suddenly had a bad feeling. She looked up and met Meg's eyes. She smiled and pointed at it. How about this? This. Actually, expensive doesn't necessarily mean good. It's best if it's suitable, Meg said seriously. I've read this from some jerk in a book before. She pouted. This is nonsense. It's not worth it, Meg said seriously. The Buddha jumps over the wall cost 10,000 copper coins. If she made 3 servings a day, it was hard to say who would win this deal. Then I'll decide next time. She retracted her hand and smiled even more. Sure. Meg nodded. He felt that this woman was not as rigid as she looked. Meg cleared the table and poured a glass of warm water for she. He sat down opposite him and curiously asked, in your underground city, what are those who are above 10th tier called? Extraordinaire, she answered. Meg was a little surprised by her straightforwardness. He did not get the chance to say anything and changed the topic. How strong are extraordinaires? Stronger than you. Meg, you don't believe me? She looked at the unconvinced Meg. We'll only know who's stronger after we fight. She shook her head slightly. I've analyzed your speed and strength. You haven't reached the limits of an extraordinary. The data won't lie. Meg, although he was a little unconvinced, Meg believed she's words. There were indeed powerful beings among the ancient ones who had broken through the 10th tier. They were the so-called gods on the Norland continent and the extraordinary beings in the underground city. Are there many of these superhumans? Meg asked curiously. She shook her head. The number of level 10 powerhouses is limited. Naturally, there won't be many extraordinaires. I've always been curious. When the ancient ones left the Norland continent, they were pursuing a higher upper limit. What's so special about the underground world that they could break through the 10th tier upper limit? Meg continued to ask. You should know very well that this question is beyond the scope of your knowledge, she said calmly with a cold expression. Meg shrugged. When it came to the core questions, it was not easy to get the answers out of she. Thank you for your hospitality. She put down the empty glass and got up to walk to the door. At the door, she stopped and turned her head to say, the underground city has always been strictly guarded against prying eyes from the outside world. If you don't want to get into trouble, you'd better restrain your curiosity. Is this a warning? Meg laughed. Sort of. She nodded slightly. Then, is the underground city looking for a son-in-law? Meg asked out of the blue. She turned to look at Meg and frowned. Don't you have a wife? If I don't, will you consider it? Meg looked into her eyes. I'm not interested in men. She looked away and pushed the door open to leave. Interesting. Meg looked at the slowly closing door and gently stroked the anti-material rifle with his fingers. If she didn't like men, did that mean she liked women? No wonder she was so difficult to flirt with. He just didn't know which type she liked. The beast-eared lowly Connie? Vitality dragon maid Mia? Domineering vampire Camilla? Flirtatious succubus Angela? Golden-horned little Wang Jane? Meg held his chin and pondered for a while. He still could not think of a girl to send to seduce she. However, on second thought, it was best not to send a girl to her death. On second thought, it seemed like sending a girl to another girl could not be considered sending a girl to her death. Meg took out his communicator and sent a message to she. Next time, call the girl along and treat you to barbecue. Top-grade beef with fat and lean meat. Skewer it and place it on a charcoal grill. It sizzles with oil, brush with sauce, sprinkle with cumin and chili powder. Eat it while it's hot with a glass of bubbling cold beer. That's life. The other side was silent for a while before replying with one word. Okay. Meg put away his communicator and did not continue to lick. See, whether a girl is easy to flirt with or not depends on whether you can capture her interests. It would be strange if a low-level native like you talked to someone from a higher civilization about Bartley. However, it would be different if you talked about food. As long as she was not a real fairy, she had to eat. On the other hand, she completed her report through the video link in the spaceship. She closed the connection and subconsciously raised her hand to look at the notification bar. There was no new message notification. She was stunned for a while before putting away the virtual screen with a slightly strange expression. She had always been a loner with almost no friends. No one would contact her except for work messages. However, these days, she would glance at the notification bar from time to time as if she was looking forward to something. It was a strange feeling. Beep. There was a soft sound. She raised her hand and the virtual screen automatically opened. There was a new message in the notification bar from Vicky. Sister She, when are you coming to Rodu? I'll treat you to a meal. She looked at this message and was silent for a while. Usually, she would directly reject such messages to get close to her. However, when she thought of the message Meg just sent her, she thought for a while and replied. I'll take you out for barbecue in 2 days. Okay. I like barbecue. You can contact me when the time comes. Sister She is so nice. Vicky replied instantly. What an old bootlicker. Okay. She ended the chat with a word. I can't have too strong of a desire for food. Apart from delicious food, I should record more of the development of the Norland continent's civilization, she muttered to herself and then picked up a book from the bookshelf. Why this book again? Red braised pork is delicious. I'll eat it next time. I wonder how his barbecue tastes. Is it as good as the red braised pork? The laws of the underground city did not seem to have any special requirements for marrying into the family. Some families still had this old practice, but it seemed that marrying into the family was not a very good status. Did he not care? Chapter 22-29. Boss, it's here. Are you sure they're inside? Then what are you waiting for? Let's go in. Wait a minute, boss. There are rules here. You have to queue. I have to queue too. I'm here for business. Look, the one in front is the city lord of Chaos City and his family. If you think it's appropriate for you to cut the queue, then you can go ahead yourself. I see. Actually, queuing is pretty good. It's more orderly. Hocatelan followed Garland and Milo to the back of the queue, and lined up properly. Hocatelan, who had rushed for the morning flight, finally arrived at Chaos City before noon. After being picked up by Garland, he went straight to Mamie's. He had been on his flying steed for half a day, so of course he wasn't here for lunch. However, he was just in time for lunch, and there was already a long queue outside Mamie's. Even if he wanted to talk to Meg about a collaboration, he had to wait until the lunch service ended. Hocatelan glanced at the city lord Michael's family of 3, and softly said, to let the city lord queue outside in the cold wind to wait for the door to open. This Mr. Mac is indeed as the rumors say. Garland nodded, and said, Mr. Mac is very civilized. Every customer has to abide by the rules set by the restaurant. Otherwise, he will refuse to serve you. You didn't meet any troublemakers? When the city lord of Chaos City chose to respect this rule, how many idiots do you think would still go against this rule? Garland smiled, and softly said, moreover, Mr. Mac's daughter has two very powerful masters. They are the two at the front, the Lord of Ice, Julian, and the Lord of Fire, Crassus. Do you think it's okay to be a troublemaker here? It's actually those two. Catalan gasped. Crassus' reputation in the Roth Empire was not below Alex's, and everyone knew how powerful his archenemy, Julian, was. He didn't expect Mr. Meg's daughter to have two such powerful masters. With these two powerful backers, this little rule was naturally nothing. Thank goodness you stopped me just now. How Keto patted Garland's shoulder. If he had gone straight for the door, he didn't know if he would have been whipped 5 times by the two old comrades. Did you mention that to Mr. Mac? Catalan asked softly. This isn't something I can decide. I was afraid that he would misunderstand, so I didn't mention it. I was waiting for you to talk about it yourself. Garland shook her head. Catalan nodded and frowned as he looked at the signboard that was glistening under the sunlight. She had been quite confident on the way there and had thought of countless plans. But when she really stood in front of Mamie's, she suddenly lost her confidence. Boss, don't worry. Even if the deal doesn't work out, it's not a loss to have a meal here. Maybe you won't even want to leave. Garland comforted. Then I'd like to see if it's really as amazing as you say, Catalan said with a smile. As a 200-pound Yumaba, he was a gourmet passed down from his ancestors. His father founded Whole Foods and Delicacies, and then developed it in his hands. For a long time, he was the pillar of Whole Foods and Delicacies column. Milo, who hadn't found a chance to interrupt, said with a smile, you don't have to worry about that at all. How can a man who can impress countless foodies with his words disappoint? Catalan nodded. That was exactly what he was thinking. Meg's column that he wrote himself could be beaten by top gourmets, and his main job was obviously a chef. He had been too busy recently, so he didn't have the chance to come to Chaos City. Today, he had to take the opportunity of his business trip to have a taste. Ho, the new dish today seems to be spicy too. Why don't we order a spicy soup too? Vivian said with a smile as she held her mother's hand. Will it be too spicy? Will there be blisters on our skin tomorrow? Eunice asked worriedly. Mr. Mac's spiciness is not ordinary. We'd better be careful. Michael nodded in agreement. As a victim of the spicy grilled fish, he was very wary of anything that had the word spicy in it at Amy's. Luna smiled, but didn't say anything. She often attended such family gatherings, so she didn't find it awkward. It's all right. We came early, so we'll definitely be able to order the tofu pudding. Just one serving of tofu pudding will solve any skin problems, Vivian assured. That's true. Tofu pudding is delicious and nourishes your skin. Eunice nodded. Then, she turned to look at Luna, and stroked her face with a pained expression. Luna, you have to eat more later. You've lost weight, and there are dark circles under your eyes. You must have been staying up late recently, right? Hope Elementary School is doing the inspection. It's a little complicated, but it's almost over, Luna said with a smile. Even though she was far away from home, the gentle and kind Mrs. Eunice always gave her motherly care and warmth. A resigned smile appeared on Michael's face. He didn't have any status in the family to speak of. Seeing as they had already come to an agreement, there was nothing for him to do. The restaurant opened for business, and customers lined up to enter. Vivian and the others sat down in a corner by the window. Even though many people recognized Michael, they didn't approach him to chat. This was a tacit understanding among the customers at Amy's. Even the business discussion at the dining table was cancelled. After all, there were still many people waiting in line for an empty seat, so there was no time for them to slowly discuss business. Vivian picked up the menu, and quickly found a new dish. She then said, I want a spicy chicken, a sweet tofu pudding, and a large spicy grilled fish. You can order the rest. Vivian handed the menu to Luna. If it's a large grilled fish, then it should be enough for us. Luna looked at Michael with a thoughtful smile, and said, why don't we change it to a small grilled fish, and then order a few other dishes? That's a good arrangement, Michael agreed. Of course we have to have grilled fish, but we can still have other dishes. The grilled fish had saved Vivian's life. Even though Michael couldn't stand the spiciness, he was still very attached to the dish. Oh, you don't want to eat grilled fish today? Then I'll order a small one for myself. You can order the other dishes. Vivian nodded. She didn't think that there would be people who didn't want to eat grilled fish. Michael ordered an eggplant with garlic sauce, as well as a bowl of shaved noodles recommended by Vivian. Eunice ordered a bowl of roast goose. She had heard a few friends mention it a few days ago, and she wanted to eat it. Luna ordered a tofu pudding for herself, but didn't order any more dishes after seeing that there were already quite a few main dishes. Vivian cocked her head to one side, and whispered into Luna's ear, You're welcome. It's my father's treat today, and you don't get such an opportunity every day. Luna, just order whatever you want to eat. If we can't finish it, we can take it away, Michael said with a smile. Chapter 22:30. As a new product launched today, the spicy chicken was priced at 800 copper coins per serving, and it was still popular among the customers. The customers who had been holding back for a month had their spending power and appetite released at the same time, and there was an obvious increase in the number of orders per person. Amy, who was full, sat on the high stool behind the counter, eating an ice cream in her hand and staring at a cartoon on the tablet. Little Boss is so cute. Mr. Mac is so lucky. I wonder which woman will benefit from it in the future. Of course, it's me. The wine hasn't been served yet, and you're already drunk. A few young ladies sitting at the counter teased softly. Amy looked away from the tablet and landed on the ladies. She said seriously, Father likes ladies who eat a lot. Then she turned back to continue watching the cartoon. The four ladies were stunned. They looked at each other, and their minds suddenly became lively. Didn't we order a little too little? Should we add more? Yes. I felt a little hungry before I came, and I've been eating a lot recently. Then let's order a few more dishes. How about a red braised pork? Meow. Ugly Duckling lay on its back with its belly as a flat cushion. It looked at those stupid women with its head hanging and rolled its eyes. Don't move. Amy whispered as her little meaty paw hit its face. Ugly Duckling immediately tilted its head and pretended to be dead, not daring to move. This is Mr. Meg's daughter? Catalan looked at Amy, and said in surprise, she can draw picture books at such a young age? This is Mr. Mac's daughter, Little Boss Amy. She seems to be 4 years old this year, but she didn't draw the picture books, Milo said with a smile. I knew it. Catalan smiled and almost got a shock. He thought the threshold for geniuses and prodigies had been raised so high. Little Amy is the disciple of Crassus and Julian. I heard that she won the championship at the Magic Caster tournament some time ago and defeated an 8th-tier Magic Caster, Milo continued. Cough, cough. Cough, cough. Catalan's eyes widened. He almost coughed to death, but he still looked at Milo in shock. You mean she's an 8th-tier Magic Caster? A 4-year-old 8th-tier Magic Caster. Garland nodded and said seriously, at present, we only know that she defeated an 8th-tier Magic Caster, but we're not sure if she's an 8th-tier Magic Caster. Catalan suddenly felt that his brain wasn't working properly. A 4-year-old girl had defeated an 8th-level magician and won the championship. This was a story that even a picture book wouldn't dare to draw casually. Catalan's, Milo, as well as Milo. Milo thought for a while and said, I don't think the three of us together can beat that fat cat. What kind of beast is that? Keto was shocked. That's the mysterious existence called Ugly Duckling by Little Boss. I think under its orange fat cat appearance, there might be some mysterious magical beast's true form hidden. Milo nodded solemnly. He looked at Ugly Duckling, who was lying on the counter with its belly supporting a black metal plate, and said, no matter what kind of powerhouse it is, it treats them with such an expression. You can imagine how powerful it is. Hocatelyn and Garland stared at Ugly Duckling's round face for a while. Ugly Duckling seemed to have sensed something. It showed them a pair of dead fish eyes, and put on an expression that said, "You mortals dare to peek at me?" I knew it. The two quickly retracted their gazes and agreed with Milo's words. Let's have a spicy chicken too. Milo flipped open the menu. Is there no chicken in this spicy chicken? Hocatelyn looked at the picture. His eyes were full of chili. It was a bright red plate, but he couldn't see where the chicken was. This. Garland and Milo were also stunned. This really looked a little mysterious. Maybe Mr. Mac wants to tell everyone that this dish is very spicy, and the chicken is hidden in the pile of chili, Milo analyzed. Could it be that Mr. Mac hid the chicken inside the chili? Chewing it together with the chili? Garland guessed. This is dried chili, not green chili. How can it be? Hocatelyn rolled his eyes, pointed, and said, let's order it and see. Makes sense. Anyway, it's boss treat today. Milo nodded. Hocatelyn waved his hand, and said generously, it's my treat today. Garland's eyes lit up, and she said with a smile, then let's have a look at Buddha Jumps Over the Wall. Hocatelyn glanced at the price of 10,000 copper coins per unit. His eyelids twitched, and he reached out to press down on the menu. Is this Buddha Jumps Over the Wall as fragrant as the succubus from the massage parlor? Garland and Milo smiled knowingly. They turned the page and ordered grilled fish instead. Of course, the succubus was more fragrant. Hocatelyn straightened his clothes and also smiled. One serving of Buddha Jumps Over the Wall was 10,000 copper coins, and 3 servings were 30,000 copper coins. Going to the massage parlor and ordering a succubus for a set of 699 copper coins was not only cheap, but also comfortable. I'm really a smart boss. Hocatelyn ordered the dishes and looked around the restaurant. The original wood-style decoration was simple and elegant. The comfortable partition did not affect the hall's transparency, but also gave the guests a comfortable sense of distance. It could be called a master-level example. After the guests took their seats, the restaurant that could seat hundreds of people was full. They ordered in order and spoke softly and slowly. It was not noisy at all, and it made people feel comfortable. From the moment you stepped into Mamie's, you could feel a relaxed atmosphere, including the feeling that the waiters gave you. They were close but also a little distant. It was just the right sense of distance, and it made people feel more at ease. I've been to so many restaurants. Mr. Mac is indeed the most impressive rule maker I've ever seen, Hocatelyn said in admiration. He had read about the rules and order of Mamie restaurant on several occasions in the past, but he was still skeptical that a restaurant with so many different races would be able to enjoy a comfortable meal. Now that he was witnessing it in person, he was truly quite stunned. Some of Mr. Mac's ideas are indeed very advanced, but it does give the guests a better dining experience. Garland nodded with a smile. If you were in Rodu, you definitely wouldn't imagine that eating with demons, orcs, and giant dragons could be so harmonious and elegant. Actually, all of you don't realize one thing. Because this is Chaos City, and more importantly, Mr. Mac's dishes are irreplaceable, so he has a higher voice in the hearts of the customers, Milo said. For a foodie, it was a disaster to put you on Mamie's blacklist. After ordering, the dishes were delivered to the guests' tables one after another. Your spicy chicken. Mia came over with a tray, and placed a spicy chicken on the table. Chapter 22:31. Hocatelyn and the others were in the midst of their grilled fish when they turned their attention to the spicy chicken. They were greeted by the sight of a sea of bright red chili peppers, and their bodies began to heat up just from looking at it. However, the real thing really matched the picture perfectly. There wasn't a single piece of chicken in sight, it was completely covered in chili peppers. It can't really be a dish of stir-fried chili, right? Catalan picked up his chopsticks and brushed aside the chili peppers. It was as if he were sweeping away a layer of fallen leaves, revealing the brown chicken beneath. The small pieces of chicken were fried to a beautiful golden color, and they were hidden among the countless chili peppers. After the chili peppers were brushed aside from the spiciness, the crispy aroma of the chicken also wafted through the air, making all three of their eyes light up. Looks quite interesting. Let me try it first. Catalan eagerly picked up a piece of chicken and put it into his mouth. After biting into it, the outside of the chicken was crispy and fragrant, but after biting into it, the inside was extraordinarily tender and juicy. With this bite, a spicy and fragrant taste filled his mouth. It was numb but not numb, spicy but not dry. It was quite chewy, and the more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. He felt that he couldn't stop, and couldn't help but pick up another piece. This chicken had probably been fried twice. The first time, it was cooked at a low temperature, and the second time, it was refried at a high temperature. That was why the chicken was so crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. Catalan had only tasted this method in a few fried chicken restaurants in Rodu, and most chefs viewed it as a secret. The control of the oil temperature was also of the utmost importance. The condition of Meg's spicy chicken was far superior to that of the fried chicken restaurants he had tasted in the past. Every piece of meat was in perfect condition, and he couldn't help but want to slap the table in praise as he enjoyed the deliciousness of the dish. One had to realize that those fried chicken restaurants had been passed down for several generations, and their recipes had been improved over and over again, but they still couldn't compare to Meg's new dish. Mr. Mac's culinary skills were clearly exemplary. Furthermore, not only did the chicken have a layer of flavor on the outside, it was also rich in flavor on the inside. It was clear that the chicken had been marinated in advance before it was cooked. Details often determined whether a dish could be called a delicacy or not, and this spicy chicken was impeccable in terms of creativity and details. After eating a few pieces of chicken, Hokito put down his chopsticks and panted. After a while, he realized that his forehead and nose were covered in sweat. How carefree. This spicy chicken is too fragrant. Catalan praised. He could now be sure that Milo was not lying. His words could only express 1/10 of Mr. Mac's food. Only those who had really tasted the food could experience the deliciousness. Any description of the food would seem a little weak. For example, he couldn't think of many words to describe this spicy chicken. Perhaps he needed to wait until he went back and sat alone at night to seriously reflect on it. Only then would he know how to write this manuscript. Of course, the most important thing now was to finish off the table of delicacies in front of him. Otherwise, he would feel too ashamed to face himself. Milo and Garland lowered their heads and ate their chicken in silence. What kind of food speech was this? He couldn't stop at all. On the other side, Vivian eagerly picked up a piece of chicken and placed it into her mouth. As she chewed, her eyes lit up, and after swallowing, she exclaimed, "Oh! This is so delicious. The chicken is crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It's a little similar to Beggar's chicken, but it's more delicate. In one bite, you can experience two completely different textures, but they have the same amazing taste. It's spicy and refreshing. It's amazing." Vivian picked up another piece of chicken and put it into her mouth. As she chewed, her eyes were filled with tears of happiness. That familiar warm feeling appeared again. In her body, a warm current slowly flowed, nourishing her already repaired body. Other than the spicy grilled fish, she had a new choice. Is it really that good? Michael picked up a piece of chicken skeptically. He could smell the spiciness, but it didn't seem very strong. At least, it wasn't as crazy as the spicy grilled fish. Michael let out a light breath and put the chicken into his mouth. He bit into the chicken. It was indeed crispy, but the crispy exterior wrapped around the tender interior. After biting into it, the juicy meat began to explode in his mouth. Numb. Spicy. Fresh. Fragrant. Michael's face was slightly red. His mouth was open, and he raised a hand to fan himself slowly. At the same time, he had to maintain the dignity of a city lord on his face. His eyes were also glistening with tears. Father, isn't it super delicious? It's so delicious that I'm about to cry. Vivian looked at Michael, and then picked up another piece of chicken and put it into Michael's slightly open mouth. Michael? It's so delicious. Michael's tears flowed slowly as he nodded and praised with a red face. Luna looked at this scene of a benevolent father and a filial daughter with a smile on her face. However, she suddenly felt a little homesick. Eunice picked up a piece of chicken with the serving chopsticks and put it into Luna's bowl with a smile, and said, "Luna, you should try it too." "Thank you." Luna took a bite of the chicken. Seeing that it was full of red chili, she already had some expectations of how spicy it would be. It was still within an acceptable range. The chicken was neither big nor small, and it was just the right size to chew. It was spicy and crispy, and it was a little intoxicating when chewed. She subconsciously raised her head to look in the direction of the kitchen. Through the crowd, she could only see a busy silhouette. A smile appeared on her face unconsciously. Mr. Meg was still a creative person. He could always surprise people with delicacies. Mr. Mac is really amazing. He can always come up with something new for me. Vivian ate a few pieces of chicken, and was still full of praise. "I think you'll be the happiest if you marry Mr. Mac," Eunice said with a smile. "Mom, you have such connections?" Vivian turned her head and looked at Eunice with a serious expression. "You really dare to think about it?" Eunice laughed in exasperation. "I object to this marriage." Michael, who had finally suppressed the spiciness with beer, raised his hand and said sternly, "Father, just eat your food." Vivian picked up another piece of chicken and put it into Michael's mouth. "Michael, I don't really want to, but our teacher Luna." Vivian's gaze turned, and she looked at Luna with a smile. She whispered, "Mom, little Amy is Luna's student, and she likes Luna a lot. Why don't you help set them up?" "Vivian." Luna reached out and pinched Vivian's waist. Her face quickly turned red, and she looked at Eunice and whispered, "Auntie. She's just talking nonsense." "There's no such thing," Eunice smiled and said, "It's okay. Auntie has been through this before. I understand. Mr. Mac is indeed a good person. Auntie will help you ask him later." Michael frowned. He wanted to tactfully remind them that this marriage was not very appropriate. Irina was not someone to be trifled with, and Meg most likely did not have the guts to do so. However, when he saw Vivian reaching out for a pair of chopsticks, he tactfully shut his mouth. Sigh. Mr. Mac's charm had nowhere to go. Chapter 2232. Mr. Mac, this is my boss. He specially came to Chaos City today to talk to you. After the lunch service, when Meg was about to close the door, Garland brought an extremely tall middle-aged man over. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Meg. I am Ho-Catalan." Ho-Catalan extended his hand with a smile. "Nice to meet you." Meg shook his hand before retracting it, and saying, "If Boss Ho-Catalan wants to talk about the exclusive column, then there's no need for that. I have already signed a contract with a few other magazine publishers, and this matter has already been settled. Although it's a little regretful, I still respect Mr. Meg's choice very much." Ho-Catalan nodded, and continued, "However, I am not here for this matter today. I want to talk to Mr. Meg about the color printing." "Color printing?" Meg frowned slightly. He didn't expect that the second person to come to talk to him about this apart from the hill was Hokadlan, who came all the way from Rodu. Your daughter is a genius in painting. She will definitely become a famous painter in the future. Hokadlan took out the picture book that he had bought earlier, and smilingly said, and you, who solved the color printing problem, will become a person who will be recorded in history. Oh, you are talking about this. Meg smiled, and said, then you might have misunderstood. I commissioned the Night Elves printing factory to help me print this picture book. To be able to reproduce it so perfectly, the workmanship is indeed amazing. Huh? Hokadlan and Garland were both stunned. They looked at each other and stared at each other. Could it be that the color printing method was not invented by Mr. Meg? Instead, it came from the Night Elves? This was completely out of their expectations. If the commissioning party was the Night Elves, then it would be a little troublesome. The Night Elves were rather famous on the Norland continent recently. Irina had rebelled against the Wind Forest, created the Night Elves, and brought tens of thousands of elves to Chaos City. However, they didn't expect the Night Elves to build a printing factory after coming to Chaos City. And it even solved the color printing problem? Of course, if Meg's picture book was printed by the Night Elves, it meant that this printing factory would also accept printing work from others. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to reach a cooperation with the Night Elves and seize the initiative. It was just that they had just arrived and had no contact with the Night Elves, so they didn't know how to contact them. Irina was famous, and she had Alex as her backer. The current Night Elves could no longer be underestimated. Hokadlan looked up at Meg, and his eyes suddenly lit up. He smiled and said, Mr. Meg, can I trouble you to introduce us to the Night Elves in charge of color printing? We, Whole Foods and Meats, want to upgrade our products. This is a small token of our appreciation, please accept it. Meg looked at the banknote in Hokadlan's hand and smiled as he waved his hand and said, there's no need for the money, I just want to introduce you to someone. I'll take you there, but whether or not this matter will work out will depend on you. All right. Thank you for your trouble. Hokadlan nodded happily. Meg boarded their horse-drawn carriage, and went straight to the textile factory in the north of the city. He wanted to reject Hokadlan directly, but on second thought, he threw this hot potato to the Night Elves. Color printing was indeed a very important core technology. Even the hill was tempted, and Hokadlan had traveled thousands of miles to Chaos City early in the morning. This showed how attractive it was. He was more afraid of trouble. It would be too troublesome if he had to reject all the different people who came to him for cooperation every day. With such huge benefits involved, it was inevitable that some people would have other thoughts, and that would be even more troublesome. The Night Elves were a good scapegoat. Anyway, he planned to help them develop the printing industry and set up the first printing factory on the Norland continent that could accept color printing. And the Night Elves had Irina and Alex's support. With Alex's reputation as the Norland continent's savior, no one would dare to have other thoughts. With the core technology in hand and a strong backing, he was definitely a strong client. Speaking of which, he was still borrowing his own reputation, so he didn't feel guilty at all. The Night Elves were all on his side, so it was just a matter of a few words to smooth things over. Mr. Meg, are there any taboos on the Night Elf side? Was it successful when you went to talk to them? Hokadlan asked carefully as he sat opposite Meg. Meg looked at Hokadlan, who was sweating, and could tell that he was a little nervous. He couldn't help but find it funny, but he still calmly said, it was quite successful when I went to look for them. I made a simple request and signed the contract. I don't know if it was because of my face. Hokadlan's face twitched, but he still smiled. Mr. Meg's handsome face is indeed a plus. I think so too. Meg nodded. Hokadlan. Although he was a little speechless at Meg's narcissism, Hokadlan felt a little more confident in his heart. This meant that the Night Elves printing factory should have sufficient production capacity, and they didn't have any long-term high-quality customers. A customer like Meg, who suddenly wanted to print a picture book for his daughter, was not stable. But Whole Foods had a monthly circulation of hundreds of thousands of copies. As long as they could confirm it, it would be a big business. The horse-drawn carriage stopped at the entrance of the textile factory. Meg alighted and said to Hocatelan, "Wait here for a while. I will go and find someone for you." "Thank you, Mr. Meg." Hocatelan quickly cupped his fists. Meg waved his hand and strode into the textile factory. The elf at the door even greeted Meg familiarly. "Seems like Mr. Meg is indeed a regular here." Hocatelan let down the curtains and felt much more relieved. Meg entered the textile factory and went straight to Irina's office. Irina was listening to Ashley's report on the progress of the weight loss potion. When she heard the report from outside, she looked at Ashley and said, "The effect is sufficient, but whether it will be popular still needs to be tested. Make a batch of finished products first, then find a group of interested customers and let them taste it. After that, make improvements based on the feedback." "Okay." Ashley put away the potion bottle on the table, opened the door, and went out. "Hello, Mr. Meg." Ashley greeted Meg, who was standing outside the door. "Hello, Miss Ashley." Meg nodded slightly. His gaze landed on the blue potion bottle in her hand, and he smiled. "This is the weight loss potion you mentioned last time?" "Yes, this is the finished product." Ashley nodded. "Can I take a look?" Meg asked curiously. Ashley directly handed the potion bottle to Meg. Meg pulled the stopper and sniffed. There was a strong smell of grass. It wasn't a strong smell, but it definitely didn't make one have much appetite. Chapter 22-33. There were already more than 40,000 night elves. During this period of time, the number of night elves who joined the night elves from the Wind Forest was still increasing. The textile factory was huge, and they didn't have to worry about sales. However, with the high efficiency of the steam textile machine, they could only employ over 10,000 night elves. Of course, with the textile factory's current operating condition, they could totally afford the daily expenses of the night elves. Of course, it wasn't enough to cover the expenses. As the highest leader, Irina gave the highest order to blossom more and become well off. To promote the development of the night elves in many directions. When Meg came the last time, he happened to hear Ashley and Irina discussing this weight loss potion. Although it was called a weight loss potion, it was actually a kind of herbal prescription that had been passed down from the elves' ancestors. It indeed had the effect of lowering body fat, and the side effects were very small. Even little elves would drink a cup every day to maintain the smoothness of their intestines. Irina and the others planned to improve this prescription before turning it into a weight loss potion for sale. Meg admired Irina's foresight very much. Women occupied the absolute throne in terms of consumption. No matter if it was clothes, daily necessities, food, or toys, women had the most powerful spending power. As for becoming beautiful, women were even more willing to spend more money and time. This could be seen from the popularity of the tofu pudding. It was a type of weight loss potion that could make you slim down without exercising. Moreover, it was completely different from those cheap potions on the market that relied on diarrhea to reduce water content. There were almost no side effects. Once it was released, the enthusiasm of women could be imagined. However, Meg frowned when he smelled it. For the sake of becoming beautiful, women could easily accept this little flaw. However, if they wanted to make it into a national health drink that could be sold well and had a wide market instead of just focusing on women's needs to lose weight, this might not be enough. Meg sucked up a few drops of the green liquid with a straw, and dripped it into his mouth. The taste of the green grass was rich and slightly bitter. There were also some impurities, and the taste was very bad. I don't know how effective it is for now, but I think it's best for you to make some improvements on the taste and texture. Meg put the cap back on the medicine bottle. He looked at Ashley and said, "The filter screen can be finer, or the impurities can be smaller. At the very least, it won't give people an obvious sense of granularity." The smell shouldn't be very good for ordinary people. You elves may be more receptive to the fragrance of this grass, but for ordinary people, it's a little pungent and bitter. You can add some fruit acids and sweeteners to improve the taste. Ashley took out a small notebook and quickly made notes. After thinking for a while, she asked, if it's sour fruit, what kind of fruit is suitable? It seems like it's hard to find fresh fruits in Chaos City during this season. Lemons, oranges, apples. You can try many of them. Fresh fruits are actually not hard to find. Chaos City's ice and snow have yet to melt, but the Demon Islands are like spring all year round. With your current conditions, it's not difficult for you to disguise yourself and make a trip to the Demon Islands. Meg smiled and said, you have to have a global awareness when doing business. Ashley's eyes lit up. She nodded with a smile and said, okay, thank you, Mr. Meg, for your guidance. You're welcome. I happen to have something to discuss with you and Princess Irina. Let's go in and have a talk, Meg said. All right. Ashley kept her little notebook, took the potion bottle, and followed Meg into the office. Meg told them about the plan to build the Night Elves printing factory. If they could use color printing on a large scale, it should be a very huge industry. This made Irina and Ashley rather happy. Because I'm worried that people will target us, I intend to announce to the public that this technology is controlled by the Night Elves. There might be many people coming to look for you to cooperate. However, our production capacity is limited at the moment, and we can only produce some high-quality picture books. Therefore, we will reject those collaborations with the reason that we don't have enough production capacity. You can keep the customer's information. When our production capacity expands in the future, we will establish a collaboration with them, Meg said. All right. Ashley nodded and noted it down. There's a person outside the door now. He's the boss of Whole Food Mart. He wants to seek a collaboration. You can reply to him according to this. I brought him over, Meg said with a smile. You're rejecting the person you brought over too? Ashley was a little surprised. He's just pushing the responsibility to us. Irina pursed her lips. She could see through Meg's thoughts at a glance. Ashley was deep in thought, but she didn't feel disgusted. Mr. Meg was the Night Elves' most important partner. Regardless of whether it was helping them to break free from the blockade back then or the series of support after they came to Chaos City, which allowed them to gain a foothold here, it was enough for the Night Elves to treat him as a distinguished guest. Now, he was handing such an important industry to them. This trust and care was just to save them some trouble, so they naturally wouldn't shirk it. Ho-Catalan received an invitation to enter the factory, and the person who received him was the person in charge of the printing factory, Miss Ashley. She was a beautiful and dignified elf. However, when he finished his request for a collaboration, the other party rejected his collaboration with the reason that they didn't have enough production capacity. Boss, how was it? Garland asked softly as he looked at Ho-Catalan, who came out after a while. It didn't work out. Ho-Catalan shook his head. He looked at the quaint factory door and sighed. They said that they don't have enough production capacity, so they're only taking on some exquisite picture books at the moment. They'll collaborate with us again when their production capacity increases. In that case, all the production capacity is taken up by Mr. Mack. Garland was a little surprised, but he still consoled him. It's not too bad. At least the other party agreed to collaborate with us after their production capacity increases. We've got a head start. Ho-Catalan nodded. He could only console himself like that. Meg walked out of the door. Ho-Catalan quickly lifted the curtain and said, Mr. Meg, let me send you back. Thank you. Meg didn't stand on ceremony, and squeezed into the warm carriage. It was such a cold day, so he couldn't be bothered to hail a cab back. How was it? Is it a success? Meg asked with a smile as he sat down opposite Ho-Catalan. It's all thanks to Mr. Meg. It's half done. They said that we can collaborate after our production capacity increases, O'Catalan said with a smile. That's good. I heard that their production capacity isn't very high. They can only print 1,000 picture books a day. Meg nodded. Yes, it's all thanks to Mr. Meg's introduction. O'Catalan flattered him again. Meg was able to take on all the production capacity of the color prints alone, and even if he added more money, he couldn't persuade him. It could be seen that the relationship between Meg and the Night Elves was indeed very good. It was worthy of a deep friendship. O'Catalan flattered him a lot along the way, and also asked about some information about the color prints in a roundabout way. Meg accepted all the flattery, and all the information was vaguely dealt with. Anyway, the blame had already been thrown out, and he had nothing to say if he said that he didn't know anything. This is a small token of my appreciation. I'll buy candy for the 2 children. Please accept it, Mr. Meg. When they got off the carriage, O'Catalan took out the banknote from before and stuffed it into Meg's hand. Meg glanced at him, and thought to himself that he would just treat it as an additional fee for the million-selling magazine. He accepted the money with a clear conscience. Chapter 22:34. Meg went to the ice cream shop and had a private chat with Gina to inform her of Lantist's current situation. Gina couldn't hide her joy when she heard that Lantist had successfully integrated into the underground city. However, she couldn't hide her disappointment when she knew that she wouldn't be able to meet them again. Don't worry, Gina. This is only the current situation. When Lantist gains a foothold in the underground city and has more say, you two might be able to meet again. Meg patted her shoulder gently. Gina nodded gently and smiled again. It's all right. I chose to stay. I'm relieved to hear that they are all well. Meg looked at her smile, and couldn't help but feel sorry for her. He said, I will ask them again later to see if there are other ways to enter the underground city. If it's suitable, I will bring you along. All right. Although Gina couldn't think of any way that Meg could enter the underground city, she had an inexplicable confidence in him. Oh, yes, boss. I want to make a trip back to Lantist in the next 2 days. Gina took out the crystal ball that Dexter gave her. There was a little blue light shining in the crystal ball. The sea god's pearl is acting strangely. The high priest once said that this might be related to the sea god's ruins. I want to go back and take a look. Meg knew that she was talking about the trench that Lantist was in previously. He looked at the crystal ball, nodded, and said, I'll go with you in the next 2 days. I'll be worried if you go alone. All right. Gina nodded obediently with warmth in her heart. But what is this legend about the sea god? Is it the god that Lantist believes in? Meg asked curiously. Yes. After Lantist sank into the sea, they believed in the sea god. They made sacrifices and established a connection with the sea god, asking the sea god to bless Lantist. In the past few thousand years, the sea god had. Gina nodded and told him a legend about the sea god's belief. It wasn't much different from the gods that other races believed in. The connection between the sea god and Lantist was still very vague. The sea god's pearl was one of the mediums, and there would be some strange phenomena occasionally. It would be seen as the will of the sea god, and the high priest would analyze it. This made Meg wonder if the sea god really existed. The existence of the underground city had shattered some of his previous assumptions. The so-called gods above level 10 existed in the underground city, but they were called extraordinaires. The ancient ones migrated to the underground world because they couldn't become gods on the Norland continent. If all the races worshipped gods, then where were they? Other extraordinaires were so down to earth, yet your god was always making illusory things to entertain his descendants. This was indeed very strange. Even the various races did not have very accurate records about the gods, including Irina, who grew up in the core of the wind forest. She still had not come into contact with the so-called gods. Therefore, Meg was quite interested in Gina's so-called sea god anomaly. He wanted to see if it was a mythical natural phenomenon or if someone was really faking it. Of course, there was another very important reason why he wanted to go to the endless sea realm. He wanted to eat seafood. Furthermore, the restaurant hadn't had a team event in a long time. Letting the girls bring their beautiful swimsuits and go for a swim at the beach to let loose their moods, was pretty good. In the evening, Mia came to the restaurant early. "Mia, why are you here so early today?" Meg looked at Mia, who seemed to have a lot on her mind, and let her in first. "Boss, Mia entered the door and stopped in her tracks. She looked up at Meg, pursed her lips, and hesitantly said, "I'm a little worried about big sister Elizabeth." "Don't worry. Everyone says she's safe. She might have already returned to Dragon Island," Meg said with a smile. He heard from Irina last night that Rankster had already returned to Frost Dragon Island and sat on the Frost Throne again. Elizabeth had gone back with him. However, they hadn't come to look for Mia yet. They might have other plans, so he couldn't reveal too much. But Mia still looked worried. She took out a delicate purse and said to Meg, "Do you know any way to contact her? Do you need money? I have the salary that I've saved for the past few months here." Meg thought for a while and said, "Then I'll ask someone for you. I have a friend who happens to be in this field. I'll give you news in 2 days." Mia's eyes lit up, and she happily said, "Okay. Thank you so much, boss. Here's the money. This money is for you." Mia handed the purse in her hand to Meg. "Ask a friend. It's free. Keep this money. It wasn't easy to save it." Meg pushed the money back with a smile. This girl was really treating him as an outsider. Mia looked at Meg, and her hand that was holding the purse stopped in mid-air for a while. Then, she hugged Meg tightly and let go. She took 2 steps back and seriously said, "Boss, I will definitely work hard in the future. It's pretty good now. If you work harder, the others won't have any work to do." Meg patted her head with a smile. He thought that Rankster and Elizabeth should be coming to look for her in 2 days. He didn't know if she was going to return to the Frost Dragon tribe to be a princess, or if she would stay. Although he was a little selfish, Meg still respected Mia's choice very much. This girl had suffered too much since she was young. She lost her father completely, and her mother died early. She wandered around as a half-dragon. Rankster owed him too much, so he would probably compensate her. With his power and status, it wasn't difficult for him to give her a lifetime of glory. Moreover, with Elizabeth around, even if she returned to Frost Dragon Island, she wouldn't be lonely. "I wonder if big sister Elizabeth found her father," Mia mumbled softly. She was worried and expectant at the same time. Meg nodded slightly. "Maybe. She put in so much effort to look for him. Maybe she found him." "It would be great if she found him," Mia said with a smile as a glimmer of hope flashed across her eyes. "How's the ice cream shop recently? Is it still busy?" Meg changed the topic. "It's quite busy. The children haven't started school yet. Many parents would bring their children to the ice cream shop to play. It's a good company." Mia nodded with a smile, and said, "But Gina is the busiest. She's the only one who can control the most mischievous and crybaby." Meg also smiled when he heard that. Gina's talent in this area was indeed admirable. "Oh, yes. When you were out, there was a missionary uncle who often came to wait outside Amy's. When I asked him, he only said that he was looking for Amy, but didn't say why. Sometimes, he would sit at the door for the whole afternoon. However, he hasn't come this week." "I almost forgot," Mia suddenly said. Chapter 2235. Someone from the church? Meg was a little surprised. Ever since they met the Pope in Rodu, they didn't have any other contact with the church. However, according to Mia, someone from the church even came to Chaos City to look for them? I haven't seen him in the past few days, so it shouldn't be anything urgent, Meg said casually. Amy's invisible wings were given to her by the old Pope. That fellow wanted to trick Amy into becoming the Saintess. He didn't want Amy to leave home to become the Saintess at such a young age, even if she was the Pope. A holy see that was declining day by day was not promising at all. I heard from Angela that the church in the Roth Empire is very powerful. Even the king of the Roth Empire was crowned by the Pope, Mia said curiously. That was just a ceremony. The Pope isn't so powerful now, Meg said with a smile. However, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and a strange expression appeared on his face. The church's status in the Roth Empire was indeed very special. During the racial war, the church's status was very high, and the Pope could appoint and dismiss the leaders of the human race through the church's meetings. However, after the racial war ended and the Roth Empire was established, the country's power began to be concentrated in the hands of the king. The church's presence and power were constantly weakened by the successive kings, and now it was like a mascot, only appearing on important occasions. The church, which had once guided humans out of the Dark Age, was now only left with a little power on the surface. However, in terms of procedure, the power of the king still existed, and the Pope did have the right to appoint and dismiss the king in name. Then, this was a little interesting. Should I go and have a chat with that old man when I'm free? Meg was deep in thought. The best way to break Andre's rule was naturally from within. Are you going to prepare for the dinner service? Is there anything I can help you with? Mia asked Meg, who was in a daze. Just sit and play with Ugly Duckling for a while. Leave the kitchen to us. Meg pointed at Ugly Duckling, which was lying on the counter. It's too fat recently. Get it to move more. There's a cat stick under the counter. All right. Yabamia made her way over to the counter with a smile, and pulled out a slender cat stick from under the counter. There was a furry gray squirrel tied to the stick, and its long tail was wagging with a little bell attached to it. She turned to Ugly Duckling and said, "Come and play, Ugly Duckling." Ugly Duckling looked up at her with a hint of interest in its eyes before turning away and closing its eyes again. "Stupid Draken, do you think I will play with you?" Ding! The bell rang. Ugly Duckling's ears immediately perked up, and its long eyelashes fluttered, but it still resisted the urge to do so. Get up. Mia gently waved the cat stick in front of it, and the little squirrel's tail rubbed against its nose, making a soft sound. Ugly Duckling opened its eyes immediately, and swatted at the little squirrel with its paw. Mia reacted quickly, and with a flick of her wrist, the cat stick bent at an angle, and the little squirrel slipped past Ugly Duckling's paw and into the air. Ugly Duckling quickly adjusted itself from its prone position, exerted strength on its four limbs, and leaped up after the little squirrel. Mia twisted her wrist again, and the cat stick fell rapidly. The little squirrel slipped past Ugly Duckling's fingers, and then fell down close to its face. Ugly Duckling's eyes widened instantly. It had already left the counter, and with its four limbs spread out, it fell straight to the ground from midair. Luckily, its paw was thick enough, and it bounced a little when it fell to the ground. Then, it rolled forward twice before coming to a stop. Ha ha ha. Ugly Duckling, you're so stupid. Mia laughed like a goose. Ugly Duckling lay on the ground with a dejected expression on its face. My reputation has been ruined by this woman. Ding ding, the bell rang again. Although its heart was resisting, its body was too honest, and it chased after the little squirrel. Don't run. Stop right there. You stupid rat. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, which was jumping up and down because of Mia's teasing, with a smile on his face. This little thing was definitely not ordinary. It even dared to bare its teeth in front of Ozzy. Furthermore, it had only been a few months, and its weight was already close to 10 kilograms. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed the brick bed. TSK, TSK. Ugly Duckling is actually diligent in losing weight today? Amy exclaimed when she pushed the door open and saw Ugly Duckling running on the walls. Hearing Amy's voice, Ugly Duckling, which was originally focused on chasing the little squirrel, turned around abruptly. It missed a step, and fell from the beam. Luckily, Amy reacted quickly, and rushed over to give it a kick. She kicked it to the wall, and prevented it from falling to the ground. Mia caught Ugly Duckling, who had bounced off the wall, and rubbed its fat face with a smile. "Your skin is getting more and more bouncy, Ugly Duckling." Amy hung the little school bag on the hook behind the counter, and looked at Ugly Duckling. "If you grow a little rounder, I'll give you to the school's football team. They can save the effort of picking up the ball." Ugly Duckling. Sigma. Sigh, if you don't want to be treated as a football, then run 10 laps around the restaurant before eating. Amy took Ugly Duckling from Mia's arms and put it on the ground. She reached out to touch its fat paws. "Look, you don't even have legs. I still want to ride you out in the future. Do you want to roll around with me?" Ugly Duckling raised its short little leg and gestured. 2 short equals no leg. Ugly Duckling looked at her leg. Amy raised her leg and kicked it. Swoosh. Ugly Duckling started to run around the restaurant like an orange whirlwind. Its speed was quite astonishing. "You ran very well. Add another 20 laps. Amy praised. The whirlwind slipped and hit its head on the wall. After a while, it started running again. Meg looked at this scene with a smile. This was Amy's pet, so he wouldn't interfere in how she trained it. And just as Amy said, as a magical beast, Ugly Duckling was really too lazy and neglected training. If it continued to be fat like this, it wouldn't even be able to go out, let alone fight. One had to know that when beast tamers trained magical beasts, they had to train them like a devil from a young age. All kinds of combat and obedience training were extremely cruel. Ugly Duckling ran around the restaurant dozens of laps. It was simply too gentle. Amy walked to the kitchen door and looked at Meg, who was grinding soy milk, as she said, "Father, I heard from Jessica that she'll be going to Hope Elementary School in a week's time." Meg asked with a smile, "Hope Elementary School, which teacher Luna built, will be able to take in many children this semester. But has the school reopening date been decided?" "Yes." Amy nodded, and said, "I want to give Jessica a school reopening gift. Can I give her a school bag? The kind that I made myself." Chapter 22:36. Did you make it by yourself? Meg looked at Amy in surprise, wondering if her nameless system had given her a new mission. The little girl had no handwork experience at all. She didn't even know how to thread a needle, so how could she make a school bag for little Jessica? Amy nodded and said confidently, "Yeah, I think the school bag looks pretty simple. I should be able to learn it right away." Meg believed that it would be easy to learn it right away, but since the little girl was interested and could cultivate some hands-on skills, it could be a good opportunity for her to practice. "Then I'll find a tutorial for you, and you can learn how to make it yourself." Meg walked out of the kitchen and picked up the tablet to find a sewing tutorial for a school bag for Amy. He deliberately chose a simpler one. Then he went upstairs to find a thick pink tarpaulin for Amy. It was more than enough to make a school bag. "Thank you, Father." Amy hugged the tablet and looked at it carefully behind the counter. She held a pair of scissors in her hand and started to follow the instructions as she looked at them. Meg looked at Amy, who was seriously cutting a crooked hole in the cloth, and his eyelids twitched. He turned around and went into the kitchen. Sure enough, it was easy to learn, but easy to learn, anyway. If the mission couldn't be completed, it would be her system who would be anxious. As her father, all he had to do was provide enough materials. 10 minutes later, Amy looked at the ragged piece of cloth in her hand that looked like it had been bitten by a mouse. She blinked and looked at the square piece of cloth in the master's hand on the tablet. She nodded with satisfaction and said, "Sure enough, it looks better when I cut it." Yaba Mia and Anne, who were watching from the side, couldn't help but laugh. Actually, I cut the lace on purpose, Amy explained to them. And took a pencil from the side and came forward. She drew a line of lace along the edge of the cloth that Amy had cut. Then she pointed at the cloth and gestured for Amy to cut along the line. Then I'll try. Amy picked up the scissors again and carefully cut along the lines that Anne had drawn. After a while, a piece of cloth with a simple wavy border appeared. Now it's neat and beautiful, Mia praised. Thank you, Sister Anne. Amy happily looked at the cloth in her hand and began the next step, sewing. First, she needed a needle and a strong thread, which Meg had prepared for her. It took her a while to thread the thread through the needle hole. Then, she picked up the cloth and prepared to sew it. But after a few stitches, Anne stopped her, loosened the thread, and let the cloth unfold. She then took out a pencil and made a series of small dots at the same distance along the edge of the cloth. She motioned for Amy to follow the dots. Wow, this is so convenient, and I don't have to worry about the stitches being crooked. Amy's eyes lit up. She looked at Anne in admiration. You're so smart. Anne smiled and stood to the side, watching her sewing with interest. She even helped her with the thread from time to time. Under Anne's supervision, about half an hour later, a simple school bag was made by Amy. The waterproof material was stiff, and the pink school bag had a small lace border. If one ignored the poor stitches, it looked quite exquisite. Amy measured her shoulders and added 2 small straps to the school bag. Then she tried it on her own. It looked quite decent. Meg poked his head out of the kitchen and looked at the school bag on Amy's shoulder. He smiled and said, "Well, it looks pretty good. Our Amy can make a school bag now." It was her first try, and she actually succeeded. This was a little beyond his expectations. Amy looked a little smug, and said, "Hee hee, I told you I'm super awesome." She walked around with the school bag on her back and put it down. Looking at the blank space behind her, she couldn't help but ponder. It seems like I'm missing something. Shall I draw something on it for you? And said in sign language. Amy's eyes lit up at first, but she quickly shook her head. No, I have to make it myself. And thought for a moment, and then signed again. Then I'll draw it on that piece of cloth for you. You can cut it off and sew it on. Then it'll be yours. Okay. Big Sister Anne, you're so smart. Amy nodded. And thought for a moment, and then drew the backs of 2 little girls holding hands on another piece of white cloth. She also drew a round orange beside them. It's me and Jessica. Amy exclaimed in surprise. She looked at the round orange and said, "Can I not have Ugly Duckling? It looks a little ugly." Ugly Duckling, meow, meow. It's very cute. And reached out and patted Ugly Duckling's head. Meow, Ugly Duckling squinted its eyes and rubbed its head against her hand. Favorability +1. Okay, then I'll keep it. Amy picked up the scissors, and began to cut off the 2 little people and Ugly Duckling skillfully. Then, she sewed them on with a small needle and thread. After adding the 2 little people and Ugly Duckling to the blank space, it immediately became rich, and the whole school bag looked a lot cuter. It's beautiful. Jessica will definitely like it. Amy smiled happily with the school bag in her hands. Congratulations, host. You've completed the mission of sewing a school bag by yourself. You've received the title of Novice Tailor and Tailoring Proficiency. The system's voice sounded in her mind. Tailoring Proficiency? What's that? Amy asked, tilting her head. After absorbing the experience pack, young master will receive a lifetime's worth of craftsmanship from a senior tailor. No matter how complicated the design is, you will be able to replicate it perfectly. This is tailoring proficiency, the system replied. It doesn't sound very useful. I don't want to be a tailor. Amy wasn't very interested. Life experience system. This year's host is indeed very difficult to manage. Such a valuable skill. It can even let you show off to the heavens in an industry. But it was actually said that it didn't sound very useful. However, what she said made a lot of sense. For people who didn't want to be a tailor, this skill did seem to be very useless. Young master, don't you want to be an excellent fashion designer? Don't you want to be a tailor that everyone admires? Now the opportunity is right in front of you. As long as you pick up that pair of scissors, you will become a god in the world of tailoring, the system tried to encourage her. No, I don't want to. Amy refused decisively. However, she did pick up that pair of scissors, and cut out a beautiful and delicate flower from 2 pieces of cloth. She sewed it on Ugly Duckling's head with a happy smile. What a beautiful flower! And looked at the little flower and was a little stunned. She looked at Amy in surprise. How did she cut out such a delicate little flower with her bare hands in such a short time? Chapter 22:37. I understand now. Amy looked at Annie and rolled her big eyes. She nodded and said, now I know how to cut out nice bags and clothes. Clothes can be made too. And pointed at her clothes in surprise. Okay. Amy nodded. She looked around and saw Ugly Duckling, and a smile appeared on her face. Ugly Duckling shrank into Anne's arms, and it had a bad feeling. Let me make a shirt for Ugly Duckling. Everyone is wearing clothes, but it's naked. It's so embarrassing. Amy looked for cloth in the pile of materials. Ugly Duckling reached out its fat paw to indicate its natural fur coat. However, Amy ignored it. Let's make a pink one. Let's see if it's cuter. Amy picked up the unused pink fabric and gestured to Ugly Duckling. Then, she picked up the scissors and began to cut it. Mia, who was watching from the sidelines, gradually opened her mouth wide. Amy, who couldn't even cut a straight line, was now able to cut a symmetrical arc. It was even more accurate than the one Anne had drawn for her. A piece of cloth was quickly cut into shape in her hands. Be it her exquisite cutting skills or her calm demeanor, they both surprised Annie and Mia. After the fabric was cut, Amy picked up a needle and thread and began to sew. This time, the stitches weren't clumsy. Instead, they were dense and even, and were perfectly hidden in the fabric. Even many tailors can't compare with her skills. How did Amy suddenly learn how to sew? Mia clicked her tongue in wonder. She was also terrible at sewing clothes. Meg also came out of the kitchen. He raised an eyebrow at the sight of the needle and thread in Amy's hands. It seemed that the system's reward had already arrived. It was most likely related to tailoring. It looked good, but it was a rather useless reward. Who would have so many clothes to sew? She had to go out and spend money to buy clothes in order to experience the charm of money. Women had so many pleasures. If she made her own clothes, wouldn't she be ruining one of the pleasures? Soon, the new clothes that Amy sewed for Ugly Duckling were ready. Ugly Duckling, come and try on your new raincoat. Amy waved at Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling looked at the pink raincoat in Amy's hands, and was a little reluctant. However, it obediently crawled out of Anne's arms and jumped in front of Amy. Amy took it in her arms and put on its new clothes. The material was hard and waterproof, so Amy designed a raincoat for it. The waist was tightened so that it didn't drag the ground. The 4 legs were also tightened. After the hairy hair was compressed, it looked smaller. A hood was designed for its head, and there were 2 small ears on the hood, just enough to hide its ears. The pink color, coupled with Ugly Duckling's round face and big eyes, was quite adorable. Good girl. Mia pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby face with a smile, and said, your little sister Ugly Duckling now. And was also looking at Ugly Duckling with admiration. She gave Amy a thumbs up, and said, so pretty. Amy is so awesome. She can even make clothes. I can't even sew properly. Phyllis poked her head out of the kitchen to take a look, and exclaimed in amazement. Yeah, her skills are even better than our tailor's. Barbara was also looking at Ugly Duckling with amazement. It was her favorite color, pink. In the end, her gaze fell on Amy, and she said with a smile, Amy, why don't you make a little dress for me? I'll give you some candy to eat. What candy? Amy's eyes lit up at the mention of food. It's crescent candy that can only be found on the moon. I'll get them to bring me some next time they come. It's soft and sweet, and super delicious, Barbara strongly recommended. Sure, I want to eat crescent candy. Amy swallowed her saliva. She looked at Barbara, and asked, then what kind of dress do you want, big sister Barbara? I want. Barbara didn't know what to say. She wanted a pretty dress, but this clearly wasn't the answer Amy wanted. She looked around, and her gaze fell on Anne as she pleaded, Baby Anne, can you design a pretty dress for me? I'll get them to bring you a picture book of the moon next time. There are many amazing artists in the Moon Nation. Sure enough, an interested look appeared on Anne's face. After a brief moment of consideration, she nodded in agreement. Good girl. Barbara smiled. Anne's drawings were really beautiful, so she would definitely be able to design something for Amy. Everyone else was in awe, but they weren't in a hurry to make a reservation. After all, Amy couldn't even hold a pair of scissors properly in the past. She had suddenly become a master tailor. Amy admired her masterpiece for a while, but still decided to help Ugly Duckling take off its raincoat. The material of the raincoat was cold and hard. It was suitable to be worn as a tulle suit, but it wasn't comfortable to wear on a daily basis. She would go upstairs later to see if there was a better and more comfortable material for Ugly Duckling to make a new raincoat. It seems like being a tailor is quite fun. Amy had received everyone's approval, and she felt a sense of accomplishment. She wasn't so against being a tailor anymore. Of course, the most important thing was that making clothes could be exchanged for food. Young mistress, now that our factory has expanded, perhaps we can consider opening a branch. Here are the research reports for Rodu, Demon Islands, and Dragon Island. Mars placed a stack of documents on Gloria's desk. Gloria didn't immediately flip through the thick stack of documents. Instead, she looked at Mars and asked, according to the research reports, which region is the most suitable for opening the first branch? According to the reports, Rodu should be the most suitable as there are many human nobles in Rodu, and they can spend a lot of money. Furthermore, humans have relatively uniform bodies, so it's easier to control the size of their clothes. Compared to other races, which are all different in size, the cost of distributing goods there will be significantly lower. This is also a result of the experience accumulated by Suede, Mars replied. It's just as I've envisioned. If we open a new branch in Rodu, we can use the same batch of goods as Suede. Gloria nodded. She turned to Mars, and said, I need a capable person to go to Rodu and open up a new market. Mars, you might have to make a trip there in person. Mars was a little surprised to hear this. Young mistress, I'd rather stay by your side and assist you. You know that I don't have many trustworthy people around me. Cyril and Grandma have already returned, and they've been making a fuss recently. I need better results to shut them up, Gloria said. Thank you for your trust. Mars bowed slightly before standing up straight again. He said in a serious voice, I'm willing to go to Rodu and open up a new market for you. Chapter 2238. Hocatelan returned to Rhoda that night. Although the delicacies at Mamie's were irresistible, there were still many important matters waiting for him to settle in Rodu. Garland went back with them. As the chief editor of Whole Foods, his work was a complete mess after staying in Chaos City for a month. He still had to go back and plan the next issue of the magazine. The 10 gourmet magazines would receive Mag's column, and whoever did the best would reap the most benefits from this bonus. Meanwhile, Milo was ordered to stay behind and guard Chaos City. His job was to come to Mamie's every day to eat and keep an eye out for news from the printing factory. At the same time, he would submit 3 articles about Mamie's delicacies every month. His workload had tripled, but he accepted the 3,000 copper coins daily allowance happily. Although Mr. Mack had already appeared personally, the audience was not satisfied with his short column. Milo felt that such a life was very comfortable to be able to eat delicious food and ride on Mr. Mack's popularity. Milo, I heard that Whole Foods made a beautiful comeback with the help of Mr. Mack, Randy greeted with a smile as he stood diagonally behind Meg. Yes, we sold millions of copies and broke the ceiling. Milo turned back with a smile with a smug look on his face. Just as he was about to say something, he saw the young woman in a gorgeous dress beside Randy. She was sexy and charming, and exuded a mature charm. He was not so happy anymore. Mr. Mack is indeed a genius. If he were to change careers, you wouldn't be able to make a living, Randy said with a smile as he hugged the young woman's soft and voluptuous waist. Yes, he was talking about them. He, Randy, no longer relied on royalties to make a living. He was living off a woman of the highest quality. It's okay. Although Mr. Mack's products are exquisite, the production is low. It's not a problem for me to make a living, Milo said softly. Why were the rich women he heard about all burly, with exposed nose hair and weird hobbies, but Randy was so beautiful, generous, and obedient. Betty, this is the gourmet Milo that I mentioned to you before. He's quite famous in the industry, just like your husband, Randy introduced him to the rich woman in his arms. Hello, Mr. Milo. Betty looked at Milo and nodded slightly, indifferent. Hello. Milo hurriedly nodded, wondering why Randy was suddenly introducing him to a rich woman. Betty, didn't you say 2 days ago that one of your sisters was feeling depressed and didn't want to eat? Milo happened to be in Chaos City recently, so why not introduce them to each other? He's a professional when it comes to food, Randy said with a smile. Milo was stunned and looked at Randy. What was going on? Randy winked at him and gave him a knowing smile. Betty scrutinized Milo with a hesitant expression, and whispered in Randy's ear, Tafina likes young and handsome men. This friend of yours might not be her type. You'll get tired of young and handsome men after playing with them for a long time. You see, she's been sad because of young and handsome men recently. Why don't we give her a change of taste? Maybe what she needs now is a warm and sensual embrace, Randy said with a chuckle. As he spoke, he even blew gently into her ear. Betty's ears were red all the way to her ears. She nodded with a smile when Randy blew into her ear, and said, Where do you live, Mr. Milo? I have a friend. Maybe you can meet her. Milo wanted to refuse at first. As a burly man who weighed more than 100 kilograms, living off a woman was something he could never do. However, when she caught a glimpse of the corner of Randy's shirt and saw the bunch of keys, the words that were about to come out of her mouth stopped. She thought to herself that if that rich woman also looked like the one Randy had hooked up with, it wouldn't be a loss. I'm staying at Sarna Hotel. I've been staying in Chaos City recently, so I'm quite free. If I'm lucky enough to treat that lady to a meal, it would naturally be my honor, Milo said with a smile. Randy gave him a thumbs up with his hand that was hanging by his side. The restaurant opened, and Randy invited Milo to eat at the same table. At the dining table, he managed to get a lot of useful information from Betty. After the meal, the 3 of them walked out of the restaurant. Randy waved at Betty, and said, You go back to our horse-drawn carriage first. I'll have a chat with my friend. All right, I'll wait for you. Betty glanced at him, and returned to the horse-drawn carriage with a sway of her hips. Bro, you're living off a woman. I'm impressed. Milo was full of admiration. Randy put his arm around Milo's shoulder, and brought him to the side. He softly said, Don't say I didn't bring you along. Now that the opportunity is here, you have to grasp it. Her sister, Tafina, her husband has been dead for 3 years. Her family really has an iron mine. If you can get her, you won't be able to write any articles in the future. I'm afraid I can't do it. Milo shook his head and sighed. Without much confidence, he said, "You know I'm not good with words. Guts, meticulous, thick-skinned. You just have to grasp these 3 points, and you'll basically be in the bag." "Oh, right. Don't lick her immediately. That'll ruin our image as great writers. Basically, you'll be kicked out after being toyed with for a while," Randy preached leisurely. "I can't lick her? Then my bootlicker skills are useless, right? You have to be more reserved. It's best if she can lick you. That's how you'll be a winner in life." Randy reached out to pat him on the shoulder, and smilingly said, "You're the head gourmet of Whole Food Mart. Bring out your professionalism, and I guarantee no woman can resist." "Professionalism? Then, we're talking about delicacies." Milo seemed to understand a little. "Let's go." Someone should be looking for you tomorrow. Wait at the inn. Go and find a better barbershop. Fix your beard and hair, and change into a more fitting set of clothes. Randy smiled as he walked towards the horse-drawn carriage at the side. Just as he reached the carriage, Betty had already opened the door and was waiting for him. "Do I still have to fix my hair?" Milo touched his stubbled face and curly hair, and mumbled as he walked towards the barbershop not far away. He, Milo, was not trying to live off a woman. He just wanted to give a melancholic rich lady a warm home. "Do you want your literary friends to stay in Chaos City?" Betty asked as she lay in Randy's arms. Her face was flushed, and she allowed that restless hand to roam around her clothes as she panted slightly. Randy slowly stroked, and felt the softness on his fingertips. However, his face was cold and aloof as he calmly said, "It's this city's fortune to be able to let these talented young people stay." You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.